Once upon a time, there was a female knight who, because of her incredible skills, was once nicknamed the Dark Monster. For 5 years, nothing was heard about Lucia Cluer, who was supposed to become a swordmaster. However, the rumors about the dark-haired lady were so terrible that the maids did not dare look at her. Only Emperor Albert Eldarion reacted calmly to the woman's appearance in the palace. Lucia still looked young, although she had noticeably gained experience and skills during this time. The aristocrats were not happy with the presence of the arrogant knight, who did not appear for a long time. But the heroine skillfully hid her emotions, and only the crease around her eyes revealed her anger. The ruler quickly sent his assistants away when he realized that his guest might become angry. The old man began to miss such a promising person who had spent a lot of time training. Lucia behaved as reservedly as before, as she was known for her unemotional behavior. The heroine had a poor sense of tact, so she told the emperor to his face that he had grown old. Fortunately for the woman, the ruler was not embarrassed by her sharp tongue, as he was interested in her results. Albert wanted to see before him another swordmaster, of which there were only a few in the empire. The commander-in-chief was soon to resign, something the ruler feared, so he had high hopes for the young and successful Lucia, who possessed a powerful talent. Eldarion was delighted that this lady had never disappointed him in her life. It was for this reason that the man demanded that the woman continue to work as hard as she could. But this was not part of the main character's plans, and she simply had not yet had time to inform the ruler about it. Lucia, with a heavy heart, told Albert that she needed time off to care for her child. The emperor at first even decided that the woman was making an awkward joke, since it was incredible. He laughed loudly in response, wanting to diffuse the heavy atmosphere that had arisen in the room. The ruler remembered very well that Cluer had never paid attention to men before. She even disdained gifts from the knights, devoting herself to training, and therefore this woman was in no way associated with the role of a mother because she was a first-class knight. However, the lady stated that she had a 5-year-old child whom she loved. Albert felt a shudder run through him as he realized that Lucia had not been joking about this at all. But there was more to this story than just that, so let's go back a day to the Cluer estate. Then the heroine woke up in her bed in a cold sweat, although she was sure that she had died. For many years, the woman was known as the finest swordsman in their entire vast empire. Thanks to her efforts and talent, the woman quickly achieved a high status, despite her background. However, in her youth, Lucia abandoned knighthood and locked herself in her estate in the mountains. And now the heroine opened her eyes and realized that for some reason she had not died of old age. But the lady was sure that just yesterday, she had gone into the arms of death of her own free will. But this day began as usual, with the hard training that Claire did every morning. She swung her sword with diligence, feeling an unprecedented strength and dexterity in her muscles. It all ended with the lady swinging hard and the sword accidentally stabbing into the ceiling. Lucia felt a little sorry for the beautiful drawing of an angel that she had ruined with her actions. But then the woman was distracted by the familiar voice of some assistant named Burl Alterat. But the heroine was sure that no one would ever get into her secluded place. So the lady went to the meeting with interest, wanting to know how this man came to her. It turned out that Byrne wasn't the only one who visited the commander of the Empire's Dark Knights. The woman had a hard time understanding what was happening around her, as she had been living locked up for a long time. A faithful young man, who skillfully worked as her deputy, dropped to one knee in front of her. Lucia was glad to see a man who looked so much like her former assistant. She even decided that she saw Byrne's grandson in front of her, because they were like two peas in a pod. The assistant himself arrived for the commander to escort her to the imperial palace. Only the heroine decided that she was called to Byrne's funeral on behalf of his handsome grandson. Lucia had not yet had time to understand that she was no longer really an old woman in this place. In fact, the lady had returned back to the past, as evidenced by her face. At the sight of his youthful appearance, Claire even thought that she had gone crazy during her time alone in the estate. But it was so difficult to believe this that the lady was distracted by the assistant's words. He reminded her from behind the door that the emperor had summoned the commander, although she had tried to refuse service. In a panic, Claire began to search her body for old scars left over from the war. Many of them, received during her youth, were indeed in their places, but the last scar that Lucia earned before leaving the service was not on her body. This made the woman completely lose track of what was happening around her. Even the walls of the estate looked younger than the heroine had once remembered. When Byrne named the year of reckoning, the lady became convinced that she had somehow miraculously returned to the past. She remembered that it was this year that she became a swordmaster, after which her life changed. The memories of the cruel mistake Lucia made back then still haunted her. At that time, she put the interests of the empire above the lives of people, and a little girl suffered. It was for this reason that the heroine went to the mountain library to correct the future. The heroine remembered that the emperor had to summon her to his palace in order to obtain results. The woman's heart sank painfully at the thought of the events that followed. In her past life, no one told Lucia about the matter involving the noble holy girl. Therefore, the madam decided that she was simply escorting the fugitive to the temple for her protection in the future. But in the end, because of Claire, they did something to the baby that the heroine still remembers with horror. Around this time, a black disease began to gradually appear in the empire, destroying everything. A few months later, a little saint appeared before the people, who was supposed to heal everyone. And only Lucia knew that nothing good awaited that girl in the future, despite her strength. Claire arrived at the library specifically to burn any information about that lady, all for the sake of preventing this girl from being sealed in the sacred tree of the empire in the future. The heroine realized too late that someone from above was using that saint for profit. Through her stupidity and ignorance in her past life, Lucia personally brought that child to death. Therefore, this time, the woman could not allow that tragedy to repeat itself in the girl's life. She took great pleasure in throwing all the materials about her into the fire so that the saint would not be found. In this life, the heroine was not going to miss the opportunity to correct all the mistakes she had made. Lucia wasn't afraid to go against the emperor if that's what it took to save that girl. She was determined to live through this rebirth in such a way that she would have no regrets in the end. The next morning, Claire set off for another town with the help of a merchant ship. Madame remembered that it was in a quiet and inconspicuous place that the saint was first discovered. And now the woman went here before she was given the task of finding this child. This time, she noticed how terrible this place was not suitable for the life of a little girl. Thanks to her trained body, the heroine quickly moved between narrow alleys. Quite quickly, Lucia became horrified by how terrible the smell was in the area. She was about to leave when she noticed something worthy of attention in this place. It was all about the neat lock that hung on the warehouse door for some unknown purpose. This new and shining object was in sharp contrast to the surrounding destruction and old age. Lucia never doubted for a second that she had finally found something worthwhile for herself. She activated magic, and with her sword easily cut the strong castle into two small halves. As soon as the door swung open, the woman saw some rather expensive birds. But Claire didn't care about the animals languishing in the cage, waiting to be bought. Lucia focused her magic in her hands again, this time using her searching abilities. The woman was sure that a little girl must have been hiding in this god-forsaken place, and the heroine's search was crowned with success. As she detected the child's heartbeat, Madame rushed as fast as she could towards the girl, before whom she had sinned so greatly in her past life. The little girl saw this strange lady for the first time, so she was not happy about such an unexpected meeting. Seeing the confused girl, the heroine stood awkwardly in place, not knowing what to say to her. Lucia had never had the opportunity to interact with children before, as she had led an isolated life, and the only child she raised was already a teenager when she first met him. That is why it was difficult for Lucia to start a conversation with the child, even though she had been looking for him all this time. The girl herself helped the woman, as she hopefully assumed that it was her mother in front of her. A girl named Annie lived her entire short life in an orphanage, never suspecting that she would become a saint. Her only friend was Mia, who took care of the baby, as she was several years older than her. But the girls did not have much time to see each other, since the eldest was about to be adopted. This angered Mia, but at that age she couldn't contradict the orders of the director of their orphanage. Little Annie looked at her friend with hope, as she wanted to meet her again someday. Life was extremely difficult for the girl in the orphanage, as all the children constantly called her names and teased her. And Mia understood that timid Annie would never fight back against the naughty children who laughed at her. The little girl was sad because in a few days she would have no one to hold her hand at night. No matter how much the lady didn't want to, these bad thoughts kept creeping into her head, preventing her from sleeping normally. But deep down, Annie dreamed of the day when her black-haired mother would finally take her home. The little girl had no doubt that sooner or later, this miracle would definitely happen, and the mother and her daughter will go home, holding the girl's hand tightly, and will never let go. This is exactly what Annie thought as she lived through the dark and unpleasant nights in the small orphanage. But Lucia immediately categorically stated that she was not the baby's mother, no matter how much she wanted it. The knight came to this place to save the child, but she did not intend to become his mother. Although Claire couldn't help but admit that it was rare for anyone in the Empire to have hair as black as both of them. However, the woman had no intention of lying to the saint, even if it would ease her moral state. She extended her hand to the girl, hoping that she would immediately seize the opportunity offered. According to Lucia's plan, she had to successfully steal the baby from this dark and terrible place. And then the knight would hide the saint in a secluded place so that no one would dare touch the lady again. But for some reason, the little girl was in no hurry to jump into the arms of her potential savior. Instead, Annie plaintively admitted that she needed to clean the place up, or it would hurt. Claire was alarmed by the words that the lady was somehow experiencing pain while in this dark place. The heroine remembered that a difficult future awaited the girl, during which she would suffer greatly because of her strength. Claire knew that this little girl had calmly endured all the abuse, so she was surprised by her words about pain. Suddenly, a faint glow began to appear around Annie, which was the manifestation of her holy power. The matter was concentrated most strongly on the lady's hands, and she breathed a sigh of relief at the end of the treatment. Lucia realized too late why the girl's holy power had been activated in the first place. Not far away in the corner, the knight noticed a whip and realized that the girl had been beaten to test her power. This caused genuine rage within the woman, who knew how the saint had suffered throughout her short life. But the girl never complained about her offenders, humbly accepting all the humiliations directed at her. This is what angered Lucia the most, who was used to fighting for herself and her life. But it turned out that the saint had no relatives, since she had lived in an orphanage since birth. The heroine felt her heart clench with pain at the thought of how much the little girl had been through. The knight could not leave this girl in such a terrible place, because she remembered that death awaited her soon. Because the heroine's mother died early and her father rarely visited, she did not know how to act as a parent. Lucia didn't know how warm life in a family could be until she met her friends. However, even with them in her past life, Claire chose the path of loneliness and personal self-destruction. But this girl still believed in the people around her, no matter how cruelly they treated her. Lucia saw their similarities in appearance, so she decided to make the lady part of her family. But the little girl didn't have time to answer, as she was frightened by the sounds coming from the broken door. The knight immediately realized that the girl's kidnappers had returned for her to continue torturing her. Annie only wanted to find her mother, so she didn't want to stay in that horrible place. So the heroine took advantage of the commotion among the birds to safely escape with the child. It was no trouble for Lucia to climb up the walls. Despite the baby in her arms, the woman was full of desire to protect the girl this time, so that she would not suffer anymore. True, even after bringing the baby into the house, the heroine did not really understand what to do with her now. Annie stubbornly refused to leave the threshold because she was too dirty to do so. Although the knight herself did not blame the girl at all for accidentally getting her clothes dirty. But the lady had no intention of walking around the house until she was clean enough to do so. So Lucia had to play along with the stubborn little girl so that she would finally listen to her. The heroine did not consider bathing so necessary, but this was the only way she could attract Annie. As soon as the girl heard about the heated bathroom, she immediately ran to it. Lucia wasn't sure she could wash herself at that age, but Miss didn't ask for help. So the knight tactfully gave Annie time to take a bath. As luck would have it, at that very moment, the heroine urgently needed to leave on business. So the woman ordered the little girl not to touch anything in the house until she was at the estate. The saint didn't even have time to say anything in response, since she was too timid for that. So Claire set out with her assistant, confident that she had done everything correctly. But even such a smart and experienced woman in battle needed advice on raising a child. And no one could tell the commander about the children better than Burl, since he had many nephews. The boy spoke with great delight about his beloved relatives, who were growing up quickly. Lucia didn't expect to hear that her kind behavior also influenced the healthy growth of her children. Alterat had no doubt that without Lucia, it would be more difficult for him to see his nephews. The heroine still had to decide what she would do next with her child. The woman could consult with Leon Ruvens, who was the commander of the White Knights. Once they even fought a friendly duel, since they communicated quite closely. Lutia had already easily defeated Leon back then, although he tried his best not to give in to her. And then the heroine came up with a good idea to take maternity leave. This would allow Kluwer to find the people who had harmed the little saint in the past. And yet the woman would not have abandoned chivalry, which she had loved throughout her life. With the help of the connections she had made, it was easier for Madame to find the stone that would hide the baby's powers. But Lucia didn't expect that her innocent request would be perceived so by the Emperor. The ruler had no idea that his faithful warrior would so brazenly betray his trust with his lineage. The woman was left to silently listen to all the reproaches from the man who was higher in status than her. Claire initially suspected that achieving her request would not be as easy as she would have liked. She made up a story that the child's father was a herbalist, and one day he went into the forest. But death awaited him because of a collapsed mountain, where the man loved to walk the most. But the Emperor did not believe a single word of the knight, who did not look sad. Albert liked to swear loudly when he didn't like something about his subordinates, so he even accused Lucia of treason, which was far from the truth. The heroine knew that the Emperor was not at all serious in his words, so she did not pay attention. The only thing that worried her was that the man had chosen a glass so large that he couldn't hold it in his hands. Lucia couldn't ignore this fact, so she concentrated magic into her pen. The woman remembered that in his past life, Albert had died from excessive wine consumption. So, with one deft movement, she easily cut off part of the glass of wine. The ruler stared in shock at the knight, who dared to cross all boundaries. Never before had he seen a glass cut in half with an ordinary feather. This only meant that Lucia had become something more than the best swordmaster in the empire. The heroine immediately noticed a change in the ruler's mood, so she again demanded leave. In the end, Claire managed to get the vacation she wanted, even easier than she initially thought. But Albert was puzzled by the woman's advice to drink less wine. Immediately after finishing all the business, the heroine hurried back to the estate to see the baby. But all the corridors and rooms of the building turned out to be empty, as if the girl had never been there. Lucia couldn't even imagine that the saint would still be washing herself in the bathroom after so much time. The knight rushed into the steaming room in a panic, wanting to find the baby, and Annie found herself on the edge of the tub of water as she struggled to reach for the towel on the wall. At that very moment, the girl slipped in surprise as Madame suddenly burst into the room. The knight instantly tensed her trained muscles to catch the baby, but Lucia couldn't understand why the saint never got out of the bath the entire time. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes, as she still couldn't reach the towel she needed. Only now did the heroine realize that, out of habit, she had hung the towel too high. As an apology, the woman personally helped the baby dry off after a long shower. But the baby started crying again, which only made the bewildered Kluwer even more angry. The heroine never imagined that it would be so difficult for her to raise a child alone. But in the end, it turned out that she couldn't even persuade the girl to try the prepared food. Lucia always knew she couldn't cook well, but she had never tried to feed others before. So for the first time in her life, the woman felt so hopeless around her child. The only thing that made her happy was that she had managed to burn all the information about the dark-haired saint from the orphanage. There were still several years before the girl's awakening, so Lucia had time to teach her everything. No matter how difficult it was for Claire, she was not going to give up on raising the girl right away. Suddenly, Annie quietly declared that she urgently needed to go back, because it would be the right thing to do. The knight hoped that the girl would stay by her side in gratitude for saving her from the kidnappers. In fact, the little girl didn't want to leave her new mother at all, but she was afraid of being a burden. Due to stress and anxiety, the lady could not even properly express all the emotions she was experiencing. Lucia knew perfectly well that her dirty and lonely estate was not suitable for a child to live in it. The woman did not know how to communicate with children, so she directly told the little saint about this. Lucia's response was more tears that appeared on the face of the girl who did not want to leave. No matter how hard Claire tried, she couldn't understand the thoughts of the girl she needed to somehow make friends with. This caused the heroine to bring more and more tears and panic to the face of the little girl, who was ashamed of herself. As a result, the legendary knight found himself completely helpless in front of a small child. Only thanks to her enormous patience and calm character did Madame behave with restraint. She reminded the girl that she was not going to send her to an orphanage, but the house needed to be cleaned urgently. It was so important for Annie to hear the words about her acceptance that the baby immediately stopped crying. She had a hard time getting used to the new and clean environment, where she didn't have to work to earn money for food. Lucia seemed to the girl almost like an angel who had descended from heaven to make her life easier. So Annie forbade herself from crying, so as not to create even more problems for the night. The girl was going to help the woman with the housework, since she was much better at it than she was. But the little girl couldn't even imagine that in response, Lucia would ask to call her mom. The saint's deepest dreams gradually came true, time after time, right before her eyes. But before, the girl had only encountered constant ridicule and misunderstanding. Why did Annie believe that no one in the world could ever truly love her? Claire managed to come up with a new name for the baby, so that the church fans would definitely not find her. But the knight did not name the invented nickname, only because she heard an incomprehensible noise. Lucia was sure that she wasn't expecting anyone anytime soon, so she became wary. An incomprehensible rustling sound was heard outside the window, gradually approaching and increasing in size. The commander didn't hesitate for a second when she swung her sword at the unknown criminal. But it turned out that it was one of Lucia's assistants, whom she could not immediately remember. The young man introduced himself as Vernon Javier, and he was one of the best Dark Knights. The woman hardly recognized this man, since she had last seen him in a past life. Following him into the room came an equally good assistant named Gillian Olivia, and the last one to visit the commander was Heath Scyther, who was her most devoted friend. They all immediately stared in surprise at the girl who looked a little like Lucia. The woman was not frightened by the sudden appearance of the trio, who had helped her a lot. But the knights noticed that Cluer began to act much more mature, as if she were old. The heroine realized that she urgently needed to work on her manner of speech in order to fit in. At this time, Gillian joyfully picked up the girl in her arms, because she loved children. But seeing the saint's frightened look, Lucia immediately took the baby away from Olivia. Then Vernon stepped in, confident that he could win the girl over. The guy performed a simple trick, at the end of which he offered Miss a small candy. While the boys were arguing among themselves, trying to win Annie's attention, she simply fell asleep in Lucia's arms. Claire wasn't sure if this was normal, but she didn't wake the tired baby. Instead, the woman carefully carried the girl to bed, so as not to wake her on the way. The assistants were noticeably confused when the commander left them, because they had come specifically to see her. The heroine herself wanted to spend time only with the saint, to whom she became increasingly attached. The woman was sincerely worried about the girl's condition, but she did not seem ill to her. Lucia was experiencing maternal feelings for the first time, so she had little understanding of her own emotions. But when she saw the sweet little girl, Claire wanted to smile and enjoy life, which was not the case before. There was only one person Lucia felt such emotions towards, so she called the lady by this name. It was about a woman named Nia Cluer, who was the heroine's mother, who died early. As soon as Miss fell asleep, Vernon began to pester the commander about the girl. But the heroine learned her lesson, that she shouldn't have told anyone the false story about her father. The emperor's reaction showed that few would be willing to believe such a stupid story. So even to her closest aides, Claire couldn't tell anything about Nia. As they were being punished for trespassing, the youngest soon fell to the floor. In the end, Lucia took pity on the boy she had cared for since their first meeting. Heath always took advantage of his weak health to avoid relying so much on strength. His friends knew very well about this peculiarity of the guy, but now they were more concerned about the girl. The only thing Lucia could come up with was that the baby had been growing up with her father all this time, and the knights sincerely believed that it would be much better for Nia to continue living with a man. However, Claire herself saw no problem in raising a child. Even young Gillian handled this task much better than the experienced commander, all because the woman had absolutely no idea how to do anything around the house, let alone care. But the heroine still refused the help of the knights who needed to be trained. But the guys had foreseen this option, so they received permission from the emperor. Lucia had no objection to the order that her subordinates should be nearby. Claire was genuinely surprised that the assistants had put their duties aside for her. But the boys were not going to endure any longer the separation from their commander. which was already long. The knights had strong arguments, because all this time they had been obediently waiting for Lucia's return. So even the calm Vernon couldn't ignore the fact that Claire wanted to lock herself in. The heroine understood perfectly well that with these skilled people, it would be easier for her to raise Nia. Therefore, the woman nevertheless agreed to help from the knights, who were only glad about it. As a result, starting tomorrow, the little girl will have personal nannies from a special dark squad. Lucia was shocked at how quickly events had unfolded without her knowledge. She owed this to a young band of knights who had completely gotten out of hand over the past 5 years. But the biggest inconvenience to the woman came from Byrne, who knew nothing about her maternity leave. However, Lucia was not the commander for nothing, as she quickly showed her assistant the door. The heroine wanted to enjoy the peace and quiet that would soon be unavailable to her. But after a minute, Claire heard footsteps behind her again, which made her feel displeased. It turned out that a knight of the same status, only white, had come to see the commander. It was the commander of the White Knights, Leon Ruvens, who was adored by many. Lucia had no idea why such a man would come to her personally, and the man himself, with anger on his face, demanded to know who the father of the little girl was. The heroine remembered that this knight was always compared to her, called a real angel, and right now, this angel looked more like a demon, because he couldn't contain his emotions. It occurred to Claire that Ruvens had come to her on behalf of his caring father. This man was a minister, and often took care of the best dark knight without reason. But Leon was in no condition to explain who had sent him to look for Nia's father. At this time, Lucia's assistants were returning to the training dormitory with happy faces. None of them believed for a second that the child was really Claire's, all because the woman was famous for her hatred of men and love of swords. Gillian and Vernon discussed the commander's behavior the most, although they supported her, and only Heath made the right conclusion. Noticing that Lucia had changed quite a lot, the guys saw how much their commander now wanted to protect little Nia, and so Lucia could not allow Leon to speak ill of her possible daughter. She clearly saw that something was wrong with the reserved commander this time. The whole thing was that Ruvens heard from the emperor a story about the baby's father. The ruler frivolously informed the knight that Lucia's husband had simply up and run away. This immediately reminded the man of how he had tried to attract attention to himself several years ago. To do this, the knight challenged Lucia to a fight, but she easily defeated him once the battle began. That day, Ruvens was completely broken by the fact that Clure did not think about him. That is why, from that moment on, the man decided to silently wait for the woman he loved. However, even after her rebirth, the heroine had no idea about her acquaintance's deep feelings. Leon's sadness was only increased by the fact that he could not properly confess his love. Claire's understanding of people in this life has become worse because she spent so much time alone. So it remained a mystery to the woman what the powerful commander of the White Knights wanted from her. But life in the estate continued, so the heroine had no time to be sad or think. The assistants, as promised, took on some of Lucia's responsibilities to make things easier for her. Each of them took up the task that he was no worse at than chivalry. So, an ideal environment for education was created around Nia, which made Madame happy. The only thing the knights did not approve of was Lucia's strange methods of upbringing. Previously, the woman had not noticed that the floor seemed to become clean every time by itself. But now, the heroine saw that it was Nia who was diligently washing the floor, earning her living. The little girl did this with such a contented face that it seemed as if she was not at all tired. And Lucia didn't stop the girl from cleaning, because she felt better. No matter how reproachfully the knights looked at the commander, she didn't care. Claire even forgot that she had another ward, albeit much older, and one of the knights expected that the woman would pay attention to him on such an important day. So Heath was incredibly happy when the commander suddenly remembered his birthday. The woman didn't remember ever giving gifts to congratulate a friend, but she found him in a terrible place, and the guy needed support and attention. But Lucia wasn't responsible enough to remember his birthday in advance. Here the assistants were distracted by a knock on the door, since no one was expected at the estate today. It turned out that a servant had come to the commander on behalf of Leon, and had brought gifts with him. Lucia couldn't believe her ears when she heard Reuven's name, which seemed very angry to her. The assistants were unaware of the incident and accepted the gifts with peace of mind. The heroine did not have time to stop the knights, as she was too far from the door. As a result, Claire had to watch as a huge pile of boxes was carried into her estate. For the first time in her life, Lucia felt so uncomfortable about another person's actions. She was used to not expecting anything from others. But here, Leon's actions did not depend on her. Therefore, the woman was puzzled by what had happened, fearing the knight's further actions. Lucia has always been bad at deciphering other people's thoughts, which played a cruel joke on her. She decided that the man was thinking negatively about the girl who had recently appeared at the estate. But the assistants did not fill their heads with such thoughts, and were sincerely happy with the donated items. What touched them most was the cute clothes designed especially for little Nia. Claire couldn't argue that this dress would have suited the little girl much better. But for some reason, the heroine could not see anywhere the saint for whom all this was brought. Although almost all the gifts were specifically for Nia, the girl herself hastened to hide from everything. The commander quickly found the girl behind a pile of gifts, where she was trying to hide. Lucia couldn't understand why the lady used such a strange strategy at this moment. Nia's eyes were wet, as the little girl was ready to burst into tears at any moment. Claire remembered that the lady had behaved in much the same way when she lived in a dirty closet. This puzzled the woman, who had not previously noticed signs of past stress in the girl. At that moment, Olivia burst into the room noisily, offering Nia one of the beautiful dresses. But the saint began to retreat in panic, as she did not think that she deserved these clothes. The little girl was clearly ready to run away, just to avoid touching something so clean. None of the knights expected such strange behavior from the girl who had previously smiled. Only the heroine understood what was going on, so she sternly sent the assistants away. The woman had to explain to the little girl that anything becomes dirty over time. But for some reason, Nia blamed only herself for what was happening with various things. Lucia sincerely did not understand where this bright child had so many problems from. The saint burst into tears over such trifles that the knight did not pay attention to. Only now did she remember that the little girl was worried even about her dirty gloves. This meant that Nia had many scars on her heart that no one was going to heal. But the heroine had no intention of leaving the child to deal with the problems on his own. Lucia had never had to explain anything to children before, but she couldn't help but try to resolve it. To begin with, the woman took those same dirty gloves and prepared warm water in barrels. The soap fell into the water with a soft splash as the lady needed more lather from it. Claire pretended that she couldn't cope with the laundry on her own, and the little girl was pleased to realize that such a grown woman needed her help. The people playing the roles of mother and daughter began to have fun together near the foamy water. Lucia's main goal was to make the girl stop being afraid of getting something dirty. There was a look of intense concentration on Nia's face as she tried to wash her gloves. Since the baby's strength was not enough, the knight carefully helped her in this difficult task. Previously, the heroine considered it stupid to waste time on such things, but in the end, she even liked it. So she wasn't too upset that the girl did a much better job of washing the gloves. Much more important for Lucia was to see how the little girl gradually stopped being afraid of dirt. All this time, Nia considered herself a terrible person when she dirty beautiful things, and Claire tried her best to convince the lady that there was nothing scary about the dirt at all. The saint listened to her fake mother with all her eyes, carefully remembering her words. Foam and combined washing proved to the lady that she can cope with any dark stain. This circumstance made the girl so happy that she smiled cheerfully in response. Lucia felt her heart beat with joy at the sight of the happiness of a child who had had a hard life. Only Heath, who silently watched this scene from the side, did not share the general happiness. He never spoke to the commander because she went to bed immediately after doing the laundry. The woman was tormented by thoughts about why she was reborn, because everything that was happening was definitely real. But the answers never came to Lucia, because her new life was an incredible thing. The knight had to change a lot of things in her to ensure Nia's good upbringing. In her past life, the heroine could not even think about having a child, since she herself was embittered towards her parents. But after years of life, the anger subsided within the woman, and she was able to give love. The baby was the embodiment of calm for Cluer, who wanted to help her in everything. Gradually, the heroine took on the role of a real guardian, but did not even notice it, so she easily dealt with any difficulties that the girl brought with her. And this time, the emperor demanded that the commander finally take responsibility for her position. Lucia had not planned to attend the meeting, but she could not refuse the order. Meanwhile, at the Knight's headquarters, people were gradually gathering for the hearings. Chief Deputy Kluwer was already there, but he couldn't calm down because of the pile of things to do. Burl was even deliberately late, but no one even thought to say a single word to him. With such vile behavior, Alterat used any means to gain Lucia's attention. He had worked so hard to replace the commander for 5 years, but he could no longer remain in the shadows. So the man rebelled deep inside himself. Although he continued to do impeccable work, Burl was responsible for the papers that were urgently brought in during the day for review. This was precisely the job that the other assistants were not very good at. But the heroine herself didn't care what kind of work her best deputy was doing. All because as soon as the woman appeared in the assembly hall, the knights began to laugh at her. The heroine was not surprised by this, because knights of warm colors have always been distinguished by a hot character. But over the course of her long service, Lucia learned not to react to provocative attacks. So Commander Bengart couldn't bring out the rage on the Dark Knight's face, even if he really wanted to. In addition, Kluwer had the resilience of an old person, having lived to that age in a past life. So, with her sweet smile, the woman irritated Bengart, who was not ready for something like this. His friend Ashen, who also happened to be the commander of the Yellow Knights, behaved much more restrained. But even the calm speeches of this man quickly tired the heroine, because she rarely attended meetings. Claire expected to be verbally attacked for her decision to take time off to care for her child. But Leon appeared just in time and angrily interrupted all the negative talk about Commander Lucia. The man sat confidently next to the woman, although he had never done so in meetings before. At the same time, Reuven smiled sweetly at his opponents, feeling moral superiority over them. But the escalating dispute had to be interrupted, as the assistant began a meeting of commanders. Throughout their meeting, Leon stared at Lucia, making the woman uncomfortable sitting next to him. On the agenda was the important question of what to do with the Empire's shrinking budget. Everyone remembered very well that the ruler traded with one of the neighboring states for magic stones. In gratitude, the Empire provided that country with military protection and political support. Lucia knew that now that the infection had engulfed the Empire, it was not to her advantage to continue this alliance. Bengart was the most indignant about this issue, although he did not help the Emperor in any way. All the funding was provided by aristocrats, who were becoming poorer every day. The heroine was surprised by the fact that the conversation gradually turned to information about the temple's savior. The woman was sure that all the rumors about the saint were exaggerated in order to sacrifice her. But Claire could not understand who would want to treat a child in such a cruel way. It was the aristocrats who invested all their energy into the idea of saving the earth with the help of a saint. They sacrificed many people for this goal and never regretted their bloody path. And now the heroine found it strange that these people ultimately benefited from the death of the little girl. Lucia only remembered the names of a few people, so there was little she could do to stop them. While the woman was lost in her thoughts, the meeting was quickly ended so that no one would quarrel. And at the exit, Bengart was waiting for Kluwer, whom he wanted to humiliate in order to feel his superiority. At exactly that moment, Burl arrived at the meeting, regretting that he was so late for it. The Red Commander took advantage of this opportunity to begin openly humiliating Lucia. He had no respect for the Dark Knights, as during the war they were joined by criminals. Despite her bad past, the heroine had long since brought order to her squad, so she met these words with anger. But for all the other commanders, nothing changed, so they continued to laugh at the Dark Ones. Altharat realized that this whole argument started because he was late, so he tried to fix it himself. But Bengart didn't have time to say a word to his deputy before he fell to his knees, unable to rise from his place. For the first time in his life, the man experienced such a strong thirst for blood that it literally tore him apart. Lucia demonstrated only a small part of her skills, but it was more than enough. The commander couldn't move a finger, even though the woman was pressuring him with just her aura. Kluwer barely contained her anger to keep from starting an unnecessary fight with another squad of knights. Lucia warned Benhart that she would closely monitor his development during her short vacation. The man never thought that this lady, who was never appointed as a swordmaster, would be so strong. Meanwhile, the saint was impatiently waiting for her savior to finally return to the estate. The little girl wasn't very bored, because she had a lot of fun things to do. Most of all, the girl liked to look at the things that belonged to her over and over again. The lady told herself what was now her property and what was Lucia's. With such a simple activity, time flew by quickly for the girl, who was waiting for the commander to return. She took pleasure in keeping her body clean, as she was no longer so panicky afraid of dirt. For the first time in a long time, Nia could smile happily at her reflection without thinking bad thoughts. Eventually, the little girl got to the kitchen utensils because she had played with other objects. But the lady did not expect that one of the plates would suddenly break into two pieces in her hands, even though they were weak. Nia stood frozen in horror, still afraid that Lucia might take her back to the orphanage. At that very moment, Heath, who had been left to watch the girl, entered the room in response to the cracking noise. The little girl panicked and turned to the guy for help, as she didn't know if it was possible to fix everything neatly. Nia tried to deny until the very end that it was she who broke the commander's plate. The little girl had no desire to return to the shelter, although she showed no affection for Cluer. Heath didn't even have time to console the girl, whose emotions were rapidly rising. Suddenly, the holy power that appeared in moments of stress again formed around the lady. She grew and grew with every second. But Miss herself did not notice these changes around her. The guy immediately guessed that it was this girl that the entire empire was so carefully searching for because of her strength. The knight wanted Lucia to travel the world with him, paying no attention to anyone else. And for this, the best option was to send the baby to the temple, for which Heath created a portal. But then the girl's strength increased several times, which her small and fragile body could not withstand. Scyther couldn't ignore what was happening, because he himself had once let magic out of control. It happened in the distant past, when his father tried to be a traveling doctor. When monsters appeared in one of the villages, the man sent his son to fight them. Once Heath did his job well, the commoners' money began to flow into their family like a river. No matter how scared the boy was to fight monsters, he was able to find friends because of his heroism. Everything was fine until the villagers started to put too much pressure on the impressionable child. At that moment, Heath did not feel his former strength, since he had not had time to recover from the last battle. But no one cared about the boy's condition, because the residents were afraid to fight the monsters. Scyther got it into his head that he absolutely had to defeat the enemies, and so he activated his abilities. But it all ended in a huge tragedy, as the baby couldn't handle the magic and created a huge flash himself. Memories of that day still haunted Heath, even though he had long since learned to control his abilities. And now exactly the same fate awaited young Nia, who did not even suspect her powers. Scyther couldn't let a child's life be ruined by just one accident, so he calmed the saint's powers instead of creating a portal to the nearest temple. The girl watched with adoration on her face as the knight who had helped her so easily acted. Heath saw himself in the little girl, and only for this reason could not cruelly drive her out of her new home on the estate. Instead, the guy fixed the plate for the lady, which made her incredibly happy because now she could stay. From now on, Nia was going to be much more careful when handling fragile objects so as not to break anything again. Scyther understood perfectly well that sooner or later, the magic inside the saint would burst out again. But the knight had no idea how such a special girl could learn to live an ordinary life. Heath's fate was not at all indicative of the lady, as he ultimately took a completely different path. But the knight was able to advise Nia to make good friends and smile more often. At that very moment, the doors behind them swung open with a loud noise as guests arrived. A little red-haired girl stood on the threshold and immediately began loudly demanding to play with her. Meanwhile, Lucia found herself with everyone around her, discussing her situation with the child. No matter how much the woman didn't want to, she couldn't resist the aristocrats who opened their mouths. The heroine spent a lot of time in complete solitude, so she managed to wean herself off evil gossip. But experience and intelligence allowed the woman not to react to people who deliberately offended her. Here, Lucia was noticed by an old acquaintance, who was surrounded by girls from all sides because of his beauty. Leon barely managed to escape the lady's tenacious embrace, as he preferred the company of his commander. But Ruvens didn't have time to think of how to start a conversation with such a silent woman. Lucia had no intention of helping her friend choose topics, as she was content with silence. He didn't immediately notice that the Dark Commander had picked up a book on raising and educating children. The woman herself did not attach any importance to the plot and history in the book, since she did not have time to study it. but Leon immediately recognized the cover, because this book was written by his mother about his upbringing. But Claire was in such a hurry to get home to her daughter that she didn't have time to hear this confession from the man. Already in the carriage, Lucia began to wonder who exactly the fair-haired boy on the cover reminded her of. The knight suffered from inattention to detail, so she could not remember the right person. At this point, the woman's carriage became stuck halfway due to the aristocrats abandoning their carts on the bridge. The assistant was very nervous about this situation, which he personally could not influence in any way. But the heroine had a calm character, so she took the stop as an opportunity to take a walk. It had been a long time since the woman had been able to enjoy the light breeze that often blew from the river. Suddenly, below, the woman noticed a familiar male face surrounded by ladies. It was a crown prince named Aaron Eldarion, with whom the commander was well acquainted. Since his teenage years, the man had been running after the woman, so he couldn't help but greet her. The prince modestly admitted that he could not refuse to communicate with the ladies, although he went out alone. The heroine saw that this man still enjoyed the same wild popularity among women, but Lucia had no desire to participate in such a thing, so she quickly took her leave. However, Irene called out to the woman who was trying to escape, as he had prepared a gift for her daughter. Eldarion pretended that he had not intentionally picked up a rattle that only babies played with. As little as Claire knew about children, even she knew the gift was inappropriate. The heir chatted cheerfully about how he had no idea the commander of the Dark Knights was pregnant, but the heroine was not interested in discussing her condition, since she was not going to change anything. But Irene didn't want to let go of the woman with whom he had a serious conversation so easily. Since she was speaking to the prince, Claire had to obey his order with a sigh. The woman was tense by the fact that the man had been watching her for quite a long time, which he himself admitted. The aristocrats immediately began to whisper excitedly when they heard such information from the heir. Lucia had no desire to become the center of gossip next to the handsome prince of the empire. 5 years had passed since they met, but the woman noticed Irene's glances at her every time, all because Eldarion was head over heels in love with the commander, who remained just as insensitive. The heroine was worried about what people would say about her adopted daughter, whom she was going to love. To avoid questions about her father, the madam stated that at that time she spent her nights with many men. This news spread like wildfire among the aristocratic women, hungry for such gossip. But after these words, the prince blushed as if there were ripe tomatoes among his relatives. Lucia did not expect that her blatant lie would cause such a violent reaction from the prince, who began to bleed. Aaron suffered from weak blood vessels in his nose, so he learned long ago how to stop the bleeding. The heir was sincerely ashamed that he accidentally stained the clothes of the commander of the Dark Knights. But the man didn't just approach the woman for no reason. He hinted that he lived not far from her. The heroine herself remembered that the crown prince's palace was located very close to her estate. Irene wasn't lying when he said he'd been watching Lucia's training constantly for 5 years. The woman was preparing for the role of a swordmaster, so she did not miss a single day of her hard training. Therefore, the prince was sure that he had not seen Cluer with a belly, as if she really was pregnant. With a smile, the heir promised to keep this little secret of the commander, in order to become closer to her. The heroine looked suspiciously at the hand the prince extended to her, as she did not want to enter into an alliance. When the woman silently walked away, Irene only admired her behavior and character even more. While Lucia was worried about the future of the prince, who died immediately after ascending the throne, what bothered Claire most was that at least one person already doubted her child. But the woman tried her best to convince people around her that she really gave birth to Nia herself. As soon as Lucia returned home, she found incredible chaos in her own estate. The commander had never met a red-haired girl before, so she was puzzled. The little girl did not show an ounce of respect to the madam, who was the mistress of the estate where she was now playing. Jillian reminded her niece of her manners, as the girl's name was Yvonne, and she was related to Olivia. Since the knight asked for forgiveness for all this mess, the heroine did not scold her. Madame was much more interested in knowing where the little saint was, who could not be heard. Taking a quick glance around the room, Lucia noticed that the little girl was hiding under the table. Claire remembered that children were prone to playing hide-and-seek, so she didn't say anything to the girl. Nia had been sitting under the table for quite a long time, because due to her shyness, she did not dare to play with anyone. But Lucia didn't realize this peculiarity of her daughter, so she pretended not to notice her under the table. The lady couldn't allow this to happen, so she jumped out from under the table after the woman. The girl needed support and understanding, as the guest was driving her crazy with her constant noise. As soon as Nia appeared on the surface, Yvonne ran up to her with a joyful cry. The red-haired girl was curious, so she asked who the woman and the lady were to each other. It was the first time Lucia had encountered such a direct question from a child, so she hesitated for a moment. However, Jillian saved the commander in time, whispering to her niece that it was a mother and daughter standing in front of her. In fact, the girl knew all the rules of etiquette well, but she simply neglected them out of spite. But now the little girl bowed as a sign of respect and said that her name was Yvonne Byrne. The heroine was surprised at how well this noisy and impudent girl was brought up. Yvonne couldn't stand still for long, so she began to bombard her new acquaintance with questions. What surprised the red-haired lady most was that Nia called Lucia by her first name and didn't call her mom. The saint herself did not see any problem with this, but now tears came to her eyes because of the remark. Previously, the heroine did not pay attention to what exactly the little girl was calling her. Only now everyone in the room was interested to know the reason for their communication. Lucia didn't even have time to come up with an excuse for such a case to explain everything to those around her. But the woman was saved by Nia, who suddenly admitted that she could not decide on such a thing. Claire felt genuinely sorry for the saint, who still suffered from the scars on her heart. The girl remembered back in the orphanage that they could take away everything she liked. It was for this reason that Nia hid any attachments she had to other things, and the woman understood better than anyone why the saint was still afraid to call her mother. All because the girl wanted to keep all the moments with Lucia deep in her heart. But Yvonne got it all wrong, because she thought that Lucia had beaten her daughter as a child. Nisia couldn't allow such an awkward situation to happen, so she was the first to rush to the commander's defense. She selflessly covered her guardian with her hands, although she herself could barely see because of her tears. The situation was accidentally saved by Olivia, who said that the lady simply loved her mother very much. The knight's words were a revelation to the heroine, who had never thought about the baby's love before, and now this girl was ready to give her life, just so that Lucia would not be harmed. Once all the arguments had died down, the girls moved into the garden to play in the fresh air. Yvonne taught Nia table etiquette, because the lady didn't even know how to hold a cup properly. Since the drink in the girls' mugs was not real, they only pretended to drink it. Byrne set an example of how it was worth playing a little tea ceremony with her, and the little saint repeated all her friends' actions exactly to do everything correctly. Never before had the red-haired lady been able to play so cheerfully and calmly in someone else's company. But Yvonne was not having enough communication, so she wanted to take a friend with her next time. Nia wasn't sure she had the right to give such permission, so she turned to her mother. However, Lucia had nothing against children on her territory, as long as the saint was happy. Byrne's daughter clearly didn't let the little girl get bored, as she was constantly coming up with new games. And so the doghouse Leon gave her became a secret base for two young girls. Yvonne easily infected Nia with her enthusiasm and incredibly cheerful character since childhood. Because of the girl's behavior, the saint remembered the instructions of Heath, who wished her an ordinary life. So the little girl wanted to be just like the carefree daughter of the famous Duke of Byrne. Even at the orphanage, the lady was different from the others, which is why the kids constantly laughed at her. But now, the red-haired lady had no intention of making fun of the little girl she considered a friend. Yvonne saw Nia for the first time in her life, but she was already ready to trust her with any secrets. It was a real revelation for the girl that her new acquaintance considered her her friend. Yvonne herself was glad that she had found Nia for herself, because before she had only communicated with Cesar. So the little girl considered it her duty to do everything so that the lady would call Lucia mother. The saint was not as confident in the success of this undertaking as the active red-haired girl. But the little girl did not dare argue with her impudent friend, to whom any matter seemed like a trifle. Yvonne had lived with her mother since childhood, so she had much more experience in communicating with her. But even she couldn't persuade the dark-haired lady to address her parent differently. Meanwhile, adults watched from the sidelines as the children played peacefully and cheerfully. The heroine had never had the opportunity to play the role of a guardian before, but now she was happy with her life. Olivia was the only one who took care of the food, as his family included excellent cooks. But even in such a good situation, Heath for some reason sat extremely quiet to himself. Claire couldn't ignore the fact that her best assistant was somehow restless. Upon returning home, the commander noticed the remnants of magic that belonged to the guy. But what came as news to Scyther was that Lucia had noticed his use of his abilities. The knight tried to do everything possible to prevent Claire from finding out about his desperate thought. But the heroine had no idea that her ward wanted to send Nia to the sacred temple. In a state of anxiety, the boy asked the commander what she would do if he suddenly disappeared from her life. He wondered if Lucia would react in any way if he disappeared from her circle altogether. In response, the heroine reminded that she had actually planned to use the knight her whole life. Even at their first meeting during Heath's rescue, the woman immediately told him about these plans. Lucia was then just recruiting young and skilled men to renew the ranks of knights. Heath was afraid to use magic again, as it could lead to a huge disaster. And Claire was the only person who didn't see any problem with it. From that moment on, nothing changed for the woman, and she would still like to work with the guy. As soon as Scyther joined the Dark Knights, people started asking him to create things. At that time, the guy had a hard time controlling his abilities, so he often made mistakes. And only Lucia never scolded him for another mistake, as she was pleased with the results. Jillian had a knack for showing up at the wrong time, and this time was no exception. She began to cheerfully discuss her delicious dessert, completely oblivious to the surrounding atmosphere. Olivia needed to hear an opinion about the delicacies, but no one could provide it to her. But the knight was preparing to send these cookies to the opening kindergarten. Lutia never thought about sending Nia to study in such a place. Meanwhile, the Children's Academy of the Empire could teach a modest girl a lot. This place was built on trust between the ruler and the aristocrats for the sake of their children. And only now did Claire seriously think about the fact that she would have to hire a different teacher. At that moment, Yvonne brought the embarrassed little girl straight to the woman, which was strange. The saint blushed even as she approached her mother, but still did not retreat. Instead, Nia whispered tenderly in Lucia's ear that she was her beloved mother. The heroine's heart began to beat faster because of this confession from the lady, which she had never heard before. Lucia never imagined that raising a child could be such a pleasant thing. She took on a huge responsibility for the life of a special miss, and did not regret it at all. But the evil aristocrats could not calm down, because Claire had not fulfilled her duties. One by one, they tried to persuade the emperor to punish the impudent swordmaster. But Albert knew better than anyone about the woman's strength, so he wasn't going to touch her. Eldarion had no intention of saying anything to Lucia, who was of great benefit to the empire. Instead, the ruler accused the aristocrats of hypocrisy, because they did nothing themselves. As soon as the emperor left the meeting, all the gossip about Kluwer only intensified. Only the emperor's assistant and Leon's father stood up for Lucia. Count Rendor did not support the opinion of the famous Phaedoran Ruvens, whom he sincerely hated. But it didn't take the old man long to prove that Lucia had the right to anything she wanted. However, the meeting was not over for the count, as he found like-minded people. Duke Anthony Kilgis fully shared Rendor's opinion, although he did not admit it directly. The man would like to do everything to remove Kluwer from the emperor as far as possible. Meanwhile, interesting events were unfolding at the Empire's Children's Academy. One of the girls who will play a role in the plot was peacefully walking down the corridor of the building. It was Emily Tangst, trying to act sweet despite her family's downfall. But in reality, the girl was not at all as kind and good as she tried to appear. She only needed this whole teaching position for a short time. Emily planned to find herself a rich husband among the aristocrats as quickly as possible. That is why she came to a place where there were many noble people with cunning plans. And the kindergarten director, who was Leon Reuven's mother, was supposed to help her with this. True, Norsha herself had no idea that such a girl had set her sights on her son, while Tangst was only afraid of her competitor in the person of the Dark Knight Lucia, all because it was she who once constantly bullied a girl at the training academy. And now Emily couldn't let anyone find out about her dirty and cruel past. But the lady was not at all discouraged, because she had the most ideal plan in the world. First of all, she intended to win Leon's mother's trust, and only then get closer to him. So Tangst generously showered the old woman with compliments that meant nothing to her. Emily has worked incredibly hard to finally get this position. In her dreams, she already saw a beautiful wedding with the best and most handsome man in the world. But Tanks didn't expect to meet her worst competitor so quickly. Lucia came to the audition for admission to the kindergarten for her little daughter. A few minutes before, the commander had just brought Nia into the common hall of the kindergarten. The heroine herself suffered from how uncomfortable the lady's everyday clothes were. If the assistants hadn't insisted on nice clothes, she would have gladly come in uniform. But Lucia didn't have to suffer for long over the outfit, as she noticed the baby's condition. For some reason, Nia looked extremely scared, although there was no particular reason for it. But, as always before, the little girl did not dare to talk to her parent about the problems. During the short time she lived with the saint, the heroine never learned to understand her thoughts and feelings. The only thing that made the woman happy was that every time the director called the family by number, this saved Lucia from revealing her last name, which any aristocrat would have recognized. The last thing the commander wanted was to cause chaos because of her popular personality. The woman wished the girl all the best, although she could not call her her real daughter. But for some reason, Nia didn't seem happy to be at the Children's Academy now. The little girl spent her entire childhood under the supervision of cruel people who always kept her locked up. That is why the commander wanted to give the lady the opportunity to live this life as happily as possible, so that even when the baby wakes up, she will still have friends who will be loyal to her. Lucia hoped she hadn't put too much pressure on the girl with her desires to fix her life. Here, Claire belatedly heard that they were supposed to be walking just a few people behind. The commander told the little girl that she was not obliged to go to kindergarten if she really did not want to. But Nia was not at all happy with this turn of events, as she was afraid to do anything contrary to her guardian. As soon as the girl was left to her own devices, she began to look around. The little girl always explored the world in this simple way, by eavesdropping on other people's conversations. And now the aristocrats were glad that their children were going to kindergarten because they were too energetic. The saint felt shocked that she could cause problems for her parent if she resisted. At this point, Lucia returned to the girl with sad news, having failed to talk to the director. Due to the lady's excitement, everyone around heard the loud, protesting cry of the dark-haired baby. Nia loudly declared to Lucia that she would definitely go to kindergarten instead of sitting at home. The women were delighted that the lady had shown so much initiative in this unpleasant matter. The heroine did not expect that the girl would suddenly, so actively demand to be sent to kindergarten. This is how the mother and daughter ended up at the interview, although neither of them really wanted to. Directissa greeted the next family with a joyful smile, who came to her for a short hearing. The only thing that bothered the commander was the girl who was standing not far from Reuven's and was shaking noticeably for some reason. But Lucia could not remember if she had seen this woman anywhere before. As many years had passed, the stranger ran away at the first opportunity, which Kluwer found strange, but did not stop her. The woman had no time to think about others, because she had to somehow miraculously pass this interview. Norsha seemed to everyone around her to be a reasonable and wise person, not even because of her years of life. But the little girl was too scared to talk to the old woman on her own. Lucia knew she could trust Leon's mother to raise the children because she was a psychologist. Even in her youth, the woman wrote several useful books on how to properly understand children. The headmistress's stories reminded the heroine of a beautiful swan that could protect itself if necessary. Thanks to Norsha's ability to communicate with children, she immediately guessed that the girl did not want to go to kindergarten, and the old woman didn't see any problem with this, because she could easily convince the little girl. But for Klur, it was news that her adopted daughter, for some reason, acted against her wishes. The saint had nothing to say in response, since she was truly afraid to go to this luxurious kindergarten. Norsha began to speak cautiously to the lady, who gradually opened up to the stranger. Reuven said that it was okay if Nia didn't go to kindergarten with aristocrats. She reminded that there are people who still want to listen to the girl, as if her stories were treasures. Norsha was sure that for Nia, that person was her mother, even though she remained extremely inexperienced. The little girl seemed to have a vision when the headmistress told her such a simple but very important thing. Lucia tried to smile back at the girl to create the impression that Norsha was telling the truth. Nia was very impressed by the fact that her mother cared about all her stories. The headmistress's words reminded the heroine of the legend that timid children are always full of stories. When the hearing ended, Lucia did not expect them to be accepted into the kindergarten, despite their behavior. Clure thought that the results of the passage would be known only in a month, but Norsha announced them earlier. The old woman sincerely believed that if Nia had no place in the academy, then no one at all deserved to be here. Moreover, the headmistress felt awkward because her son was causing minor inconvenience to Lucia. But Clure didn't understand why the old woman focused on Commander Leon's gifts. Lucia had no plans to become part of another family, even though the headmistress had spoken of this. Since Nia was accepted into school, it was necessary to quickly update her clothes at the store. The little girl began to feel more confident after just one conversation with Norsha, which was very noticeable. The heroine was not mentally prepared for the fact that the girl would soon be going to school. But this academy was famous for its chivalric history, so they could teach a lot there. The saleswoman complimented Nia's hairstyle, and the saint immediately broke into a joyful smile. The little girl admitted that one of her mother's good friends helped her with her hair, which is why she was beautiful. The woman couldn't be more pleased with the fact that the lady had noticeably grown bolder after her recent conversation with the headmistress. Although much remained unchanged in the baby, no matter how hard Claire tried. For example, Nia still didn't dare to speak honestly about what she really liked. The woman began to understand the saint better, but even this did not always help her understand the child. So, the little girl diligently continued to clean the house, although everyone told her not to do it. And she was always silent, although it was clear from her gaze that she liked some object. The heroine was afraid that this would lead to Nia having everything taken away from her in kindergarten. Lucia did not want the fate of a saint to consist of constant deprivation of something important. That's why she specifically drew the girl's attention to the delicious cookies that were on the table. Lucia planned to do everything so that the little girl herself would say that she wanted this sweet. She deliberately lied that she had dreamed of trying something similar as a child. Claire chose her words carefully to motivate Nia to confess her desires. But at the most inopportune moment, the heroine heard someone sharply call her name. It turned out that Madame Marianne, who was Burl's sister, also chose a costume for her child. She was thrilled to finally be able to speak with Commander Lucia in person. And her son, named César Chapley, had a pleasant character and good manners. The woman was so grateful to Clure that maternity leave was introduced after her intervention. But the heroine herself was amazed at how well the boy had been taught manners. Caesar clearly showed interest in the girl with whom he would later go to kindergarten, but Nia had not yet been taught greetings, so she tried to hide behind her mother's skirt. Lucia had time to get scared that Marianne would not react very well to the lady's timid behavior. However, the woman was delighted with the quiet girl who did not cause any problems for anyone. Madame would be only glad if the lady came to visit them instead of another active girl. Lucia had the distinct feeling that Marianne had sighed as she spoke of Yvonne. Meanwhile, the seamstress quickly took measurements from the obedient Nia, who fulfilled all her requests. As a sign of praise, the assistant offered the little girl to take some candies from the basket. The girl had a huge love for sweets, so it was unlikely she would have been able to resist. But, to everyone's surprise, the lady unexpectedly did not accept the offered sweets. This behavior most interested Lucia, who was constantly buying sweets. The seamstress could do nothing about the girl's refusal, as she did not want to put pressure on her. But in reality, Nia just wanted to ask for one delicious cookie for her mother. The little girl remembered that Lucia had never eaten anything like this as a child, so she wanted to treat her. Nia herself didn't notice how she put all her childish charm into action just to achieve what she wanted. The heroine had no idea that her simple words would have such consequences for her. The assistants immediately began to discuss the fact that the baby gave everything only to her mother. Lucia vowed never again in her life to make up non-existent stories for the girl, while Nia herself didn't even realize that she had done something wrong in the eyes of other people because she had become infatuated with her mother. The girl shared the cookie with the woman with all her heart, wishing her only the best. Lucia caught herself thinking that she was only happy in those moments when the lady herself was smiling. When the outfits were finished, the heroine frantically tried to remember what else she needed to buy. But then she felt someone's intense and unkind gaze on her, since she had a well-developed intuition. Lucia couldn't look around properly, because the streets were full of harmless aristocrats. The commander was most afraid that the little girl might get hurt, so she squeezed her small hand tighter. The knight was used to always meeting danger head-on, so she headed straight towards the gaze. It was only to the commander's advantage that in such a narrow alley, there would be no witnesses to her amazing strength. But the madam didn't even have to draw her sword, because behind her followed children who led a homeless life. The heroine was horrified by how many children were left homeless due to the cruelty of their parents. And now, in order to somehow survive, the children were forced to rob rich aristocrats. With a sigh, Lucia offered them a few gold coins in exchange for leaving her alone. Some of the children were immediately delighted with such easy prey, which they rarely got. But the most important child said that this still would not be enough, so we had to fight. Lucia watched in amazement at the children, who were distinguished not only by their impudence, but also by their fearlessness. Although the woman had no intention of harming them, she hid Nia behind her back just in case. Only after this did the knight activate her powers, concentrating some of the energy in her hand. In fact, the commander only wanted to scare the children, but her menacing face scared the homeless people to death. As Madame thought, the boys did not risk attacking her, as they valued even such sad lives. So the saint's guardian easily drove away the thieves, even though she didn't really do anything about it. She wondered why she was lucky enough to be reborn, while others were forced to live like this. But Lucia couldn't save every child in her life, so she quickly put the boys out of her mind. What worried Madame most was the fate of the saint, whom she had seriously let down in her past life. But when the woman turned around, for some reason, there was no one in the alley behind her, all because the girl rushed after the boys, without thinking about safety at all. Among the homeless children, she recognized her stepsister, but her beloved sister from the orphanage. It was for this reason that Nia could not stay close to Lucia, where she was safe. Saint was lucky that Mia was the most important of all the children. Otherwise, she would have definitely been taken away already. The girl understood that they could use the girl's expensive clothes, but she couldn't do that. It wasn't difficult for her to send all her friends away for a while in order to talk to the little girl alone. But Mia was not at all happy about this meeting, because the lady had exposed herself to great danger. The saint remembered all this time how the fake sister promised to take her from the orphanage. What angered the older one most was that the girl found herself all alone in such a scary alley. Mia learned the cruel truth of life, while the little girl still had no idea. The pale girl could not remain silent about the fact that Annie could also suffer her terrible fate. The saint had a hard time listening to the story of how Mia ended up on the street after being adopted. But in reality, the older one would never be able to harm her beloved and silly younger one. Nia naively believed that Lucia had managed to follow her, so everything was fine. That's why the girl couldn't hold back her tears when she realized that she had gotten lost while chasing her sister. Mia felt obligated to take her little sister back to her mother. But then she heard a strange whisper. The girl knew very well what this meant for her, so she tried to hide the girl. No matter how scared Nia was to be alone in the dark alley, she listened to her elder. The whole thing was that the leader of the gang came for the money that the children had collected. Only this time, they had almost no catch, which immediately made the man furious. He blamed Mia most of all for this, since he knew that she was quite smart. The girl was losing weight more and more every day due to hunger, but she did not dare to contradict the leader. She could only pray that the evil commoner didn't notice Annie behind her. But to the girl's horror, the leader headed straight towards the girl, whom he noticed with a sharp glance. The children immediately grabbed Mia so that she could not do anything to stop the man from catching the lady. The villain was only glad that the girl had parents, because he could ask for a ransom for her. But he didn't expect that with one deft movement, someone would cut his back with a sword. As a result of this action, the little girl fell to the ground and was hit painfully by such a high fall. It turned out that Lucia's squad managed to find Nia just in time to save her from these people. The knights could not reveal their true identities, so they introduced themselves as relatives. Jillian and Vernon quickly synchronized with each other in a plausible lie. But Heath couldn't play along with his friends as skillfully, since he didn't come up with his role right away. While the knights were arguing with each other, the bandits watched them in surprise. It all ended with Skyder refusing to pretend to be an uncle to the girl. At this awkward moment, Lucia burst into the alley, deliberately injuring herself. For the first time in her life, Claire found herself in a situation she couldn't control from start to finish. It quickly became known that Nia was unconscious in the hands of one of the bandits. Lucia saw the expression on the girl's face, which made it clear that she would not let anyone get close to the lady. Mia was so scared for her friend and herself that she temporarily lost the ability to think rationally. Therefore, the commander knocked the girl out with one light movement so that she would not harm herself. This surprised the knights, who had never seen such a move in a woman's arsenal before. Nia's breathing was calm when Madame picked her up, although the girl never regained consciousness. The heroine blamed herself for so thoughtlessly losing the baby for a while, and she almost got into trouble. Lucia was lucky that the spell tracking her condition worked as intended. That is why almost the entire squad of Dark Knights gathered so quickly in these alleys. But Burl had no idea how he would report on the death of the bandit leader. However, all the knights were pleased with themselves, as they received praise from their commander. The woman understood that she had to take responsibility for what happened to the man. But first, Madame took care of the girls, who had been unconscious for some time. Literally, a few minutes later, Nia opened her eyes as she came to her senses. Lucia was glad to see that the girl had managed to recover from everything that had happened to her. The saint immediately began to cry, due to the realization of her own guilt in this whole matter. But Claire had no intention of scolding Nia for running away from her. The only thing the woman wanted was that from now on they would only walk together. Because of everything that happened to her, the little girl herself lost the desire to leave her mother. Only now did Nia notice that part of Lucia's hand was covered in blood. Claire couldn't explain to the girl that this was the only way her signaling spell was activated, so she said she did it to protect the lady who looked at her so devotedly. At the mention of protection, the entire room lit up with a bright light due to the saint's abilities. Nia wanted to help her mother so much that she unknowingly healed her mother's hand. The heroine never thought that the girl's powers would manifest themselves at such a young age. The baby was expectedly tired from the excessive load on her still weak and unprepared body, so she fell asleep again in the woman's arms. But this time her sleep was full of peace. But it didn't end there for Lucia, because it turned out that Mia had managed to come to her senses. The girl herself had noticed earlier that her fake sister possessed special magic, and now she mistakenly decided that the commander was simply using a small child. Claire saw in this girl a frightened child who did not know how to live on. Mia believed that only in the temple would Niu have a bright future without pain and resentment. So she fell on her knees before Lucia, begging her to send the girl to the priests. But the heroine knew perfectly well that nothing good would happen to the baby in that place. Mia didn't believe these words until the very end, because she wanted to trust the pure and kind temple. So Claire had to put in a lot of effort to convince the girl to believe her. First of all, the commander admitted that she herself trusted this impudent and lost lady. At these words of the woman, Mia's heart began to beat faster as she felt warmth throughout her body. The next morning, there was a meeting of white magicians who touched upon Lucia's parenting days. Each of the women had the opportunity to observe from the side how the commander coped, so they had heard about how many people were trying to identify the girl's father. The sorceresses were even a little envious of Lucia's hectic life, which everyone was discussing. They themselves put forward theories about who Nia's second parent might be. The first candidate was Commander Leon, with rare golden eyes like a baby's. But one shouldn't forget about the Crown Prince, who was also of the same age as Kluwer. The unexpected appearance of Rufus in the office interrupted the women's further reflections. The man did not immediately notice that he had appeared during some strange atmosphere among them. However, Leon was so worried about the situation with Lucia that he quickly forgot about everything. The assistants saw that their commander was not in a very good mood at that moment. This was because all the man's thoughts were occupied with how to help Commander Kluwer. No matter how hard he tried, he could not find out who was the father of Lucia's daughter. Ruvens wasn't sure if such a devoted woman would give him a chance at a relationship. The girls, who knew a lot about Commander Lucia, came to his aid by chance. One of them was confident that Kluwer would soon send her daughter to kindergarten, and this was a great chance for Leon to meet Lucia if he brought the child too. The heroine, meanwhile, did not even suspect that Ruvens wanted to get closer to her. She was much more concerned with thoughts of how to hide her identity from the aristocrats. The woman had read more than one unpleasant article about dark knights who weren't bad. That is why Lucia did not want to reveal that she was the commander of such a detachment. The baby was very sensitive to her mother's mood and quickly began to worry. But each time, Claire managed to find the right words to calm Nia down. The knight could only hope that the lady would not use holy power, as they had agreed. Since the girl was still little, the heroine encrypted the name of the power for her. Mia, who was forced to stay and live on the estate, also helped with this. But Lucia wasn't the least bit worried about the girl who managed to survive in the dark alleys of the city. The academy was beautifully decorated for the day of the kindergarten's opening for all those who entered it. Therefore, Claire was forced to comply with all the rules of this place while wearing a dress. Although, if it were up to the woman, she would immediately remove all this disgusting lace from herself. Most of the aristocrats arrived at the kindergarten early, because it was a big event, and pretty soon they noticed a rare couple with black hair. But the mother and daughter diligently pretended not to notice the surprised looks from the side. This was easiest for the little one, as she was quickly distracted by beautiful things, so Lucia became engrossed in teaching the girl to be good at her subjects. Nia was only sad because Mia couldn't be there at that moment. Soon the most curious aristocrats dared to disturb Clure's solitude. These turned out to be women from the noble families of Ritheryn and Poffin, who were famous. Lucia was reluctant to give her last name, so she introduced herself by her first name only. But this caused a completely different reaction from the aristocrats, which Madame did not expect. The heroine felt awkward when women began to support her because of her lack of status. Only now did Claire remember that nobles did not always have time to register their surnames, and through carelessness, the commander created exactly the impression that was bothering her. So Lucia confidently stated that she didn't have a husband to change the subject. The faces of Ritheryn and Poffin instantly changed, because they did not expect such a turn of events. The heroine was prepared to be judged for her decision to raise her daughter alone. She was only worried about how everyone else would treat Nia because of this. But, contrary to Lucia's expectations, the aristocrats did not leave her, but came closer. It turned out that these women were so compassionate that they began to sympathize with Clure. But what surprised the heroine most was that the aristocrats quickly made her a victim of the war. For some reason, they decided that her husband died while defending the empire, which was considered noble. So, without wanting to, Lucia became the center of attention for all curious citizens. Since Nia didn't react to this situation in any way, the woman let everything slide. But her popularity did not last long, as the aristocrats switched to another person. Turning around, the heroine saw Commander Leon walking hand in hand with a small child. Reuven seemed extremely happy with the situation, even though he had no children. Besides, Lucia was ready to swear that this boy was that very same Caesar Chapley. The first to comment on this situation was the noisy Yvonne, who was nearby. The girl almost burst with envy when she realized who exactly brought her friend to kindergarten. However, she quickly collected her thoughts and introduced herself to the man in the best manner. Leon responded with the same sweet smile, although his was truly sincere. From the outside, Claire saw how easily Yvonne seduced Reuven's, who was stupid in such matters. The commander of the White Knights was saved only by a quick meeting of all the children who had entered the kindergarten. They were divided into squads to make it easier to teach each student individually. Yvonne was the first to step forward among the other kids to properly introduce herself to the group. The temporary teacher encouraged the children to remember each other quickly, so she was then supported by the fearless Caesar, who took an example from the brave Leon. The one who stood out the most was a red-haired boy named Gedrin, who was bragging about his purchased title. His words aroused the interest of all the children, who had not previously thought about statuses. At the very end, a timid Nia came out to introduce herself, barely able to string words together. The girl barely managed to squeeze out that she would like to become a strong knight like her mother. The impudent Gedrin immediately ridiculed the naive lady, who did not strive for a high title. The teacher could not calm down the student who was breaking all the rules of conduct. So Yvonne, who was not afraid of such fools, bravely stood up for her beloved friend. The girl quickly became furious that the boy did not want to apologize for his words, so she moved from words to actions, which she did not regret even a little later. Watching all this, the teacher sadly thought about when she would be able to leave. Meanwhile, the parents were at another meeting, where they were writing down all the materials. Lucia kept her distance, because she was sure Vernon would get the information. Claire wasn't used to working with a lot of material herself, so she was taking a break. But her secluded spot under the tree was soon found by Leon, who wanted to talk. The heroine greeted his greeting with a heavy sigh, as she wanted to be alone. Instead, she had to wait a long time for Reuven's to say something after the silence, In the end, the man spun some story about how he came to the meeting in place of someone else. The heroine sincerely did not understand what this strange man wanted from her at that moment. Throughout her past life, she had also been dissatisfied with Reuven's behavior towards the knights. Instead of properly training young guys, he often sent them straight into the ring. So the woman did not approve of Leon continuing to live only for the sake of the emperor and the country. Therefore, it seemed strange to her that the man expressed a desire to accompany her. Claire tried her best to keep a low profile, and Reuven's ruined everything so easily. Before the meeting was over, Lucia had time to get away from Leon. The heroine managed to easily drive away the commander, so she remained in a good mood. But for some reason, Nia came out with a sad face. Although she was full of enthusiasm before the kindergarten, the woman couldn't ignore it. But the girl didn't want to tell stories at all. Suddenly, the commander heard people around her start discussing the Dark Knight's uniforms. Madame barely held back an angry look at the fact that her squad had forgotten something in such a quiet place. It turned out that the knights really did appear before the people in their beautiful ceremonial uniforms. The aristocrats knew only bad rumors about this detachment, which is why they were so worried. Lucia watched the proceedings cautiously from the sidelines, as she did not know the reasons for the gathering. She couldn't even imagine that her assistants would put on some kind of performance in the kindergarten. The helpers gathered right in front of the kindergarten, as they could not miss this event. Only Burl had any sanity left to calm the disorganized knights, but even his intelligence wasn't enough to stop Jillian from causing trouble because of the initiation. Heath was much smarter than Alterath, so he silently watched Olivia's furious behavior from the sidelines. But Burl, with all his might, competed with Jillian for the right to be the best knight in the squad. The heroine couldn't understand why the knights were behaving so noisily, although they themselves advised her to keep a low profile. She valued her identity, so she did not come closer so that no one would talk about her. Since the kindergarten had a large area, Lucia was able to quickly hide from the helpers. But the woman was interested in the shouts from the side, since somewhere nearby, she heard a voice familiar to her. It turned out that Yvonne was forced to ask for forgiveness by her parents, which the girl protested against. The Byrne family tried their best to convince their daughter that she should behave like a proper lady. The whole point was that the mother of the boy, Gedrin, demanded respectful treatment of their family. She sincerely felt sorry for her son, who had heard a lot of unpleasant things addressed to him by the girl. But in reality, Gedrin did not suffer from what happened, which he showed only to Yvonne. Such impudence only made the little girl more angry, although she couldn't explain the reasons for her rage to anyone. As a result, the man who had just received the status again began to point out the girl's behavior. However, this time Yvonne's mother stood up for her because she could not allow the man to yell at the child. Few people ever managed to argue with this formidable woman with a hot temper. So the whole family of Gedrin walked away empty-handed, promising terrible punishment to their opponents. Since the mother was angry with Yvonne, the little girl urgently needed to distract her attention. Luckily for the girl, she just happened to notice Nia's mother nearby, with whom she had quite good communication. The heroine had no intention of getting involved in this squabble, but the daughter of the Baron family had already noticed her. The girl's mother immediately began to apologize for her daughter's behavior, as she considered it unworthy. It turned out that Yvonne's parents were named Julie and Dave, and they were unusually nice people. But Lucia had no desire to make acquaintances among aristocrats, even if they were so nice. Claire was already mentally cursing the moment when she accidentally looked the couple straight in the eyes. But then, for the first time in a long time, Nia disobeyed her mother, as she abruptly ran away from her. Even all the knightly skills did not enable the commander to stop the little saint in time. Meanwhile, the little girl, in front of everyone, hugged her friend tightly as a sign of gratitude for her protection. The saint sincerely considered herself to be to blame for all of her little friend's troubles. The parents had no idea that Yvonne had deservedly attacked this boy. Lucia was the most angry of all when she realized that Gedrin had been calling her daughter names. Before, Claire had never had anyone make fun of her for not having a title. But now, for a moment, defenseless Nia was subjected to such a terrible life. So, inside the heroine, a wild hatred for such bad children in the kindergarten awoke. At that moment, Alterant ran up to the woman, who was glad to meet the commander. But he was immediately grabbed by the rest of the assistants, since Lucia did not want to reveal their identities. But the aristocrats still managed to hear how this man called his boss. Byrne had no sense of the situation at all, so he only increased the tension around him. As a result, Lucia felt how people around her began to whisper about her in horror, not knowing her identity. Some of the evil whispers also reached Nia, as the aristocrats were afraid of the monster's child. The woman tried her best to avoid this turn of events, but she still failed. In her past life, the heroine didn't care what the people she saved called her. But this time, all this gossip fell on an innocent little girl. Because of this, Lucia experienced an unpleasant feeling that had not been among her emotions before. In search of at least some kind of salvation, Madame began to look around, peering at people, and Claire was incredibly lucky, because nearby she saw Leon, who had not managed to leave. Reuven's already thought that he was not destined to talk to the woman he loved today, so the man was pleasantly surprised when the commander herself ran up to him. In this man, the heroine now saw her only chance of salvation from the aristocrats, while Leon himself had no idea that all this was just a cunning plan of the lady. Lucia smiled softly at the man and asked him to give her a ride in his carriage. It was vital for Cluer that the commander take her away with him in the carriage at that moment. But Reuven's couldn't believe that luck had finally appeared on his side in such a strange form. The man felt as if he was sleeping and seeing a beautiful dream about how Cluer was finally hugging his hand. These sensations were new and unusual for Leon, who noticed that his hand was tingling. It turned out that the commander had accidentally grabbed Reuven's with such force that she had cut off the blood supply. Because he was thinking about such a pleasant moment, Leon did not immediately notice that they were not walking towards his carriage at all. It was important for the heroine to know how the small performance of the dark knights in this place would end. Only now did Altharat realize what a grave mistake he had almost made in relation to the captain. When the people had dispersed, the assistant fell on his knees before Lucia, begging her to forgive him for his stupidity. He realized too late why Madame had not revealed her true identity to anyone. But Claire had no time to pay attention to something like that, as she knew about the arrival of the bandits. Among the guests at the kindergarten, a woman noticed a stolen piece of jewelry on the aristocrat's head. Only thanks to her attentiveness did the commander come to such a simple conclusion. It was all because Gedren's mother had behaved too provocatively and had therefore attracted Lucia's attention. So now the fall of this family was only a matter of time, which could not but please Cluer. The only thing is that Madame was sincerely worried about the girl, whom she almost began to consider her daughter. She wouldn't want the little girl to start thinking of herself as the child of a terrible dark monster. Nia didn't think badly of her mother yet, but social pressure could very well affect her. Watching the lady, the heroine felt that her quiet and calm world would never be the same again. The girl made the woman experience various emotions, and she was not at all against it. As a result, the next day the assistants limited themselves to congratulating Nia at the estate. But even so, the girl was terribly embarrassed by the attention she received before kindergarten. Vernon and Gillian already treated the lady as their daughter, because they liked her. However, for the little girl, only Lucia's opinion was important, even though she was not her biological mother. While raising the girl, the heroine learned to give her compliments at the right moments. So the woman noticed that Nia no longer looked as happy as before. This worried Lucia, as she remembered that the girl really wanted to go to kindergarten. But then Heath called out to the commander with excitement, because he had something to tell her. The boy prepared a magic stone that could control the saint's abilities. But he wasn't pleased with himself, as the task took quite a long time. It was obvious to everyone that the girl would quickly lose such a small thing. But Skyder thought about this point too, so he suggested placing the stone in a medallion. Lucia found this thing too plain for the child she wanted to see beautiful. So the woman confidently declared that she would buy some other storage unit today. Meanwhile, Nia maintained the same sad expression on her face, although she didn't say anything. Like a real mother, Claire hugged the little girl and reminded her that she was the best daughter in the world. It didn't matter to the heroine whether the lady would play with someone from the kindergarten or not. The main thing was that she smiled. It took the commander a while to get this important idea across to the little girl. She really didn't mind the lady only interacting with the assistants at the estate. Nia beamed with joy when she realized that she would be loved even if she failed. Support was important for every child, and the saint was no exception to the rule. It took the woman some time to change her clothes and take her daughter to kindergarten. But even after this, Lucia could not rest, because her parents had a general meeting. Almost all the aristocrats were already in their places when Clure entered the right room. Previously acquainted Merithyrin and certain Poffin almost immediately called Lucia to them, but the heroine had no idea that she had fallen into a very cunning plan of these women. The ladies had time to observe Claire, and therefore drew conclusions about her relationship with one man. They were delighted that Lucia's maiden heart could still love someone. The aristocrats were referring to Leon, with whom they had recently caught Nia's mother. But the heroine herself was actually using the man as a distraction at that moment. Therefore, she was surprised when she heard proposals for a second marriage for her with this man. The first thing the heroine did was to deny all hints of such a state of affairs. But the woman didn't have a single worthy justification for her communication with Leon. Claire realized with horror that she would now forever have the status of a loving widow. The headmistress saved the woman from further disgrace by starting the parent-teacher meeting on time. Norcia was forced to tell everyone about the most unpleasant thing that happened within the walls of the kindergarten. The matter was that one of the families donated money obtained illegally. Ruvens apologized with regret, as she had not immediately noticed the deception of these people. The more the heroine observed the old woman, the more she liked her as a person. Leon's mother, meanwhile, reminded them that it was necessary to choose candidates for the head of the classes. Female acquaintances immediately expressed a desire to observe the detachments with their children. But Claire didn't expect that they would also nominate her for one of the important positions among the classes. Lucia was so taken aback that she didn't even have time to object to the aristocrats for how cleverly they had drawn her in. The headmistress politely pretended not to notice the slight pressure among the adults, so everyone took turns pulling out pieces of paper to determine who would take their place in the classrooms. Many women were glad that they were given responsibility for the units. Claire partly understood their desire to somehow diversify their quiet life. Suddenly, on another piece of paper, the name Ringel Bashav appeared, which was known to the heroine. Even in her past life, Lucia had noticed this family, which was now unremarkable. But after the death of the emperor, this family somehow miraculously became one of the most influential. Only now did the commander remember that she had heard the names of her new acquaintances before. She allowed herself to pull out a piece of paper by chance and saw the name Sushi Whitney on it. As Lucia expected, she came across a woman who also had influence, quite by chance. Bashav, Poffin, Ritherin, and Whitney became the four united families who donated to the saint. But until all these events happened, the heroine could not prove the harm caused to Nia. In the past, Claire was never able to understand what kind of connection there was between the aristocrats, but now it became clear to her that the beginning of their friendship was laid by a simple meeting in kindergarten. Therefore, the heroine was obliged to become the leader of the class in which her daughter studied. So she used magic, even though it was against the rules of conventional voting. But even the headmistress didn't notice anything suspicious, so she announced Lucia's name. All the aristocrats were satisfied with the vote, since they did not know the truth. The heroine had no intention of admitting to anyone her little scam as a swordmaster. She looked closely at the women's faces, but did not notice that they were disappointed with the vote. This led Claire to think that the union of the four families had indeed been a coincidence last time. Suddenly, the woman overheard that the children's baptism was about to be completed. She thought with horror about Nia, in whom the priests could sense a powerful holy force. This made the heroine run as fast as she could to her daughter to save her from a terrible future, while the little girl herself had no idea about the danger looming over her. Life was no better for Emily, who was still afraid that Lucia would finally recognize her. But now the girl has become the head of the class in which Claire's daughter studied. The children paid no attention to the shaking text, as they were talking about magic. Each of them dreamed of becoming that holy child who would be known to everyone. While the guys were talking about the dark-haired saint without a second thought, Nia could barely contain her panic. The girl remembered that she indirectly fit the description of the saint, but she did not want to leave Lucia. As usual, Yvonne came to the aid of the timid lady, chasing away all the annoying guys. Nia couldn't even imagine that the children would ask for her blessing if they had the strength. One of the first to introduce himself to the girl was Roy Whitney, who sincerely wanted friendship. Following him, all the little ones also began to ask for a holy blessing. While Emily could not concentrate on the conversations of her children in her care, The woman thought with horror about the family that had recently been sent out of the empire because of lies. That's why she was afraid to imagine what would happen to her when Lucia figured everything out. But the teacher's anxious thoughts were interrupted by the priests who came for the children. They took all the children to the initiation that the kids had to go through without fail. It so happened that Nia was the last in line to receive holy power, because she was timid. But the priests were only concerned about the girl's personal information, which they were provided with in advance. They couldn't believe that this child belonged to Lucia, known as the Dark Monster. Even such noble people felt a sense of danger when discussing the commander of the Dark Knights. But there was no turning back, so the men began to bless the lady. At that very moment, Heath, who knew about Nia's abilities, bravely burst into the room. The little girl was instantly distracted from the priests, as she had become attached to the guy. She didn't expect Skyder to hang a small silver locket around her neck in a panic. Emily tried to protest what was happening, but Heath lied and said it was a gift from his father. As a result, the ceremony ended somewhat late, since the knight did not want to leave it. Lucia didn't make it to the initiation on time, so she thought with horror about the baby's future. The commander immediately noticed that a new addition in the form of a medallion was shining on the girl's neck. She remembered that this was the very thing Heath had wanted to place the magic-controlling stone into that morning, so relief gradually descended on the woman, who had already become frightened for the baby. The heroine remembered that this medallion was important to Sather, but he did not spare it for Naya. Therefore, the woman felt even greater sympathy for such a faithful assistant. Already at the estate, Lucia studied a book on raising children, since she knew almost nothing about them. The commander remembered that her daughter was so timid that she was unlikely to get into a fight with anyone. But then Heath interrupted the woman's solitude, as the time had come for her to appear before the knights. Despite being on maternity leave, Madame had no intention of shirking her direct responsibilities, so she went out to her faithful assistants, who adored her for her strength and wisdom to the depths of their souls. Almost immediately, the heroine noticed Earl's absence, which was not a good sign. It turned out that the deputy was trying to obtain permission to use the training ground. The place was equipped with the latest equipment, so all the knights flocked there. Claire had no idea that her squad had been excluded from visiting such a good hall. The assistants remained silent all this time, only because they did not want to distract the commander from his daughter. The heroine guessed that General Helbert was not there either, otherwise this would not have happened. Lucia felt a righteous rage when she realized that the other squads had taken advantage of her absence. It immediately became clear to the woman that Burl was trying to deal with this problem alone, so she resolutely headed towards the training field, taking the people with her. Meanwhile, in that place, everyone was refusing to allow Alterat to attend training sessions. No matter how sorry the other deputy commanders were for their comrade, they could not help in any way. The man was partly to blame for what happened, because he did not want to tell Lucia anything, and now he found himself in a situation from which he could not find a way out on his own. The deputy of the Red Knights clearly saw all the doubts in the face of the opponent who was fighting for the site. Burl still remembered how this same man advised him to be more ruthless in his decisions. On that day in the war, they were not allowed to leave a single enemy alive, which was hard for Alterath. However, even the deputies of the other squads did not expect the appearance of the Dark Monster. Lucia barely kept up with the assistant, who so bravely defended her knights before the others. The man immediately bowed to the commander, from whom he had tried to hide all these problems. The heroine was predictably furious that everyone had become so bold during her absence. Kluwer was not one to tolerate neglect of her dark troop for long, so the woman took up arms, although no one understood what she was planning to do. The Red Knight's deputy was most frightened by Lucia's uncontrollable behavior, and the heroine herself didn't blink an eye as she raised her weapon in the direction of the training hall. In the book, Madame read that if children fight over a toy, then it needs to be taken away. That is why she hit the walls of the hall with all her might in order to destroy it to the ground. None of the knights could withstand the incredible power of the dark monster in front of them. Lucia easily ensured that no one would get this training hall. And now, all that was left for her to do was to give away the newly built place to everyone on a competitive basis. The next morning, the Emperor's deputy opened the curtains in his office out of spite. The old man was outraged that the ruler was suffering from idleness, hiding behind the darkness. Albert had just finished smoking cigarettes, which had become an alternative to alcohol for him. Phaedorin never tired of teasing his senior because of his bad habits. He got away with it only because there was no better assistant in the entire empire. Reuven's even managed to easily hush up the case in which the crown prince refused the engagement with a bribe. But even he couldn't understand why the ruler's son suddenly refused this profitable deal. Previously, Albert had always managed to easily direct all the actions of the handsome heir. Only this time, father and son agreed that there was a better candidate for marriage. It was perfectly clear to Phaedorin from the outside how stupid this decision was. He honestly admitted to the ruler that it would be better for him to refuse to force a woman into marriage. But Albert was so impressed by Lucia's skills that he saw no one more suitable. The emperor firmly believed that a woman was much stronger than even the title of swordmaster. And she achieved all this in just 5 years of training, so her strength will only grow. The ruler wanted to do everything possible to prevent Cluer from thinking about leaving the empire. And his cunning plan was that Lucia herself would want to remain in the state. He was confident that his son would quickly charm even such a cold and unapproachable lady. But Reuven's also remembered his heir, who was distinguished by his tenderness and caring nature. 2 older men argued with each other about who Lucia would marry. They could have reached a serious conflict if not for the deafening noise coming from the street. Neither the emperor nor his deputy could even imagine what caused this. They managed to see the dust and smoke that hung over the training ground after the destruction. Immediately after this, one of the assistants reported to the gentleman that Commander Lucia was behind this. No matter how uncontrollable the woman was, even in such a situation, the emperor could not punish her. Phaedorin again, out of spite, refused to help the emperor with the construction of a new site, all because he wanted to teach a lesson to the emperor, who desired such a wild daughter-in-law. Meanwhile, Lucia received a task related to monsters and immediately refused it. She was afraid that Nia might have forgotten about her during the mission, as it could last a long time. One of the aristocrats deliberately put pressure on the woman, hinting that she might be fired, and Claire immediately declared that she would resign, since her daughter was more important to her. But that was precisely what the man was after, because he wanted to put his son in Lucia's place. That's why he alone wasn't afraid of Cluer's decision, which would have enormous consequences. Everyone around understood perfectly well that if Lucia retired, it would provoke the emperor's wrath. Luckily for the knights, at that very moment, Aaron joyfully ran into the conference room. He arrived just in time to find Madame with her resignation document in her hands. Eldarion couldn't let Lucia leave the knights, so he gently took the piece of paper away. In front of everyone, he demonstratively tore it up, because he was going to hush up the matter. Although the aristocrat with insidious intentions tried to rebel, he was quickly calmed down. No one had the right to object to the heir who enjoyed his advantages. As soon as a couple of friends left the room, everyone pounced on the count who was causing trouble. Meanwhile, in the White Commander's office, Leon, as usual, was sadly sorting through documents. The man was not at all upset by the destruction of the site, since his unit did not go there. But the assistants still took care to order a new magical weapon. The only thing Reuven's cared about was how much Cluer would be scolded for such an offense. That's why he didn't immediately notice how his father, who rarely visited his son, entered his office. Leon immediately tensed up, as he had never had a warm relationship with this man. Phaedorin never did anything without a reason, and this time he had a plan too. The son knew his father's behavior very well, so he asked him to leave quickly. But the elder Reuvens mentioned the monster mission that his son had recently abandoned. Leon was surprised when his father then entrusted this difficult task to Commander Lucia. But what angered him most was that Irene had volunteered to personally accompany the woman. The commander of the White Knights could not allow his competitor to get past him so easily. Meanwhile, the prince tried his best to charm the unapproachable woman with his beauty. But the heroine did not understand the hints directed at her at all, so she sat with a gloomy look. She wanted to quickly return home, where the little saint was bored without her mother. But in fact, Irene did not come to Madame empty-handed, as he brought a scroll with him. It turned out to be detailed information about the case with the monsters that the disgruntled Lucia was assigned to. What worried the heroine most was that she would have to spend about a week on the case. But then Eldarion hinted that he could go with her and use teleportation to shorten the task. This offer was indeed very tempting for Claire, who did not want to waste time. But then a high-powered teleportation portal appeared in the air next to the couple. Immediately after this, Leon jumped out of it in panic, unable to find Lucia anywhere. Seeing the prince next to the woman, the man was noticeably embarrassed by this situation. Aaron didn't immediately realize why his opponent had been looking for the commander all this time. As soon as the realization dawned on the heir, he immediately began to confront Ruvens. The prince took advantage of his charming appearance in the hope that Madame would choose him. But Leon had a skill that would allow them to complete the task together in just one day. The man spent many years perfecting an incredibly complex spell called Stonehenge. This ability was similar to teleportation, but it could transport many times more people at once. Ruvens was ready to do anything to prevent another man from accompanying his beloved. The heroine herself understood that with a skilled knight by her side, it would be easier for her to complete the task, so she signed an order with him to go together to exterminate monsters. But then Madame noticed that Nia was soon to finish kindergarten, so she ran away. So Leon and Irene were left in complete amazement in each other's unpleasant company. In a class with young children, Emily was still getting used to her new role as a teacher. From time to time, particularly impudent and active children greatly embarrassed her with their behavior. Yvonne was one of those kids. As she didn't even greet Tanks normally, the woman noticed that all her manners lessons were not working with the heiress of a baker's family. But Lucia's daughter remembered all the rules the first time, so she behaved perfectly. Emily was most pleased with the success of the lady, whom she never forgot to praise, all because she did not want to attract the attention of her formidable mother, who could punish her. Tangst couldn't understand how such a formidable monster could give birth to such a baby. Nisa instantly charmed everyone around her, although she herself did not notice this convenient ability. Emily had long since guessed that Lucia was keeping her identity a secret for the kindergarten, so everything was quiet around her. The teacher was not going to reveal to everyone who Claire really was for anything in the world. She had enough problems with her children, who did not always obey her due to their stubborn age. And today, another important and obedient child joined the woman's group. This child turned out to be Princess Saren Eldarian, who amazed everyone with her incredible beauty. Meanwhile, Lucia tried to make it to the end of kindergarten so that Nia wouldn't be upset about it. But, as luck would have it, it was at that very moment that the prince again found the woman he was trying to charm. Claire had no desire to waste time talking, even with such an important person. She had to stop when Irene hinted that he, too, now had business in the kindergarten. The heir deliberately did not tell everything at once, so that there would be an opportunity to talk. He admitted that several years ago he was very worried about Lucia, who went off to war. Previously, the heroine didn't care about the prince's emotions, and now nothing has changed at all. But the woman didn't expect that Irene really knew more about her than she said. Claire desperately tried to lie, but the heir seemed to see through all the woman's tricks. Madame remembered that no one could know about the saint's powers, because the girl had not yet awakened. But she still found Irene dangerous enough to push him back against the wall. Lucia demonstrated her strength by punching the man just inches from his face. The heroine was determined to find out his immediate plans at any cost in order to protect herself. In response to such actions, capillary blood suddenly gushed from the heir's nose. Lucia was prepared for this turn of events, as the prince suffered from weak blood vessels in his nose. But the woman did not expect that she would hear a worried voice behind her. It turned out that the heir's little sister now went to kindergarten, and he was hinting at her. The guards ran after the little lady, not letting her out of their sight. But Irene immediately introduced Lucia as his savior, and not the person who had driven him to this. The girl turned out to be a surprisingly polite child, so she thanked the woman. Claire had no doubt that the lady belonged to the emperor's family because of her appearance. The older brother was delighted that he now had more reasons to communicate with Lucia. The next morning, Emily, as usual, tried her best to entertain the unruly children. Syrian hadn't had time to meet anyone yet, but she heard conversations behind her back. Tangst was worried that this royal lady could create a lot of problems for her with her mere appearance, and the woman's fears were immediately confirmed. Since the baby did not want to do anything, Siren acted so arrogantly only because the teacher couldn't object to her. Emily had to fuss around the girl to keep her even a little happy. Soon a saving break came for the woman, during which the children ran away to their toys. The little princess was the only one who didn't know what to do with herself at this time. The The lady looked at the noisy children with displeasure, angry at the father who had sent her here. Suddenly, she noticed two girls calling her to play with them, regardless of status. Eldarian didn't show any interest in the game, as she considered herself above it. She had never played with other children before, so she was afraid for her status as a princess. But Yvonne had no intention of offending the girl or trying to make friends with her on purpose. However, Siren only pushed away the red-haired girl who was trying to help her. The girl didn't like these children who were constantly making noise and shouting, although they were aristocrats. Of all of them, she chose the quietest child as her friend, who turned out to be the calm Nia. Yvonne immediately stood up for her friend, whom she did not want to share with other children. But no matter how hard the girl tried, the princess did not pay attention to all her objections. The voice of reason among the children was Caesar, who suggested that they play together from the very beginning. Siren took advantage of the opportunity and approached the dark-haired little girl who was standing nearby. But although the princess insulted Yvonne, Nia did not understand a word and continued to smile. So, without even noticing it, the saint found herself among those close to the emperor's daughter. From now on, Siren was going to drag the silent girl around with her everywhere. Soon the children sat down again to complete another developmental task. The princess merely gave instructions to Nia, who calmly handed her all the pencils she needed. But this submission angered Yvonne so much that the girl began to select the necessary colors. It took Siren a moment to realize that this red-haired lady actually dared to confront her. But Emily quickly realized the situation. But she was powerless to influence anything. In the end, when Nia reached for another color for her new friend, Byrne took that one too. The little girl was so jealous of Lucia's daughter that she was even angry at her at that moment. A real battle began between the girls, each of whom was not going to give in to the war. The other children watched this competition with delight, enjoying any entertainment. In the end, Yvonne took all the pencils for herself, as she did not want to share with the princess. Siren wasn't used to losing, so she roughly pushed Nia away from the children's table. She blamed the loss on the saint, who was indirectly involved in the conflict. This turn of events left Emily with no way to help, as Yvonne was furious. But Nia only asked for forgiveness for her slowness, since she did not want to offend anyone. No matter how much Yvonne yelled at the girl not to clean up, she took all the blame on herself. With tears in her eyes, Baron demanded that Siren stop treating the lady like a servant. But this whole fight upset Nia the most, as she wanted to be happy for her mother. Siren didn't expect that the little girl didn't get into a conflict because she wanted to bring good news. The princess had experienced maternal alienation more than once when her mother did not come to her, and each time she cried bitterly to her beloved maid, who consoled the young mistress. In the end, Eldarian couldn't hold back her tears because she realized how wrong she had been all this time. She allowed Nia to tell her mother that she had made a new friend at kindergarten today. The saint was sincerely delighted by this news, which she would be able to share so rarely. Surprisingly, after this conversation, peace temporarily reigned among the children in the kindergarten. So that evening, the girl happily told her mother all the events in the kindergarten. She was delighted with the fortress that had been built, thanks to which no one quarreled anymore. Lucia remembered that she had indeed seen some kind of fortress in the middle of the children's room. Seeing the smiling lady, the heroine could not help but be touched by her joyful eyes. Before, it seemed impossible to Claire that the arrogant Siren would make friends with anyone. But the fact that the emperor's daughter turned out to be kinder pleased the sensible woman. Seeing her mother's thoughtfulness, Nia decided that she had not told a good enough story. The little girl in the story carefully avoided all the unpleasant moments that happened to her. And then it turned out that Lucia was going to leave her daughter at Yvonne's house for a while. The commander didn't notice how with each of her caring words, the little girl became sadder. The saint would have preferred to go with her mother, if that had been possible. As soon as Claire noticed that the lady had stopped smiling, she guessed what was the matter. The woman was even ready to give up her position, if only Nia would continue to smile. However, the little girl did not want such sacrifices for her mother, who already gave her so much. So she put a smile on her face and wished the woman a good and pleasant journey. That same night, Leon built the previously promised Stonehenge in advance, so that everything would be ready. However, the man did not dare to leave the place in case Lucia arrived earlier. In fact, on this trip, Reuven's planned to confess his long-standing feelings to Cluer. He still remembered his recent conversation with the prince about his relationship with Lucia. The heir accused Ruvens of hiding his intentions regarding the knight's commander. In response, the man told the prince that he liked Clure precisely as a woman. At that very moment, Lucia returned for her pen, and it was unclear whether she had heard anything. And now, Leon was tormented by the uncertainty of not knowing what Clure was thinking. Even the animals that, as usual, surrounded him did not console the knight at all. While Ruvens was deep in thought, the birds did not give up and surrendered to him, and the man himself remembered all the warm moments with Lucia, which he will always keep in his heart. Suddenly, at that moment, a woman appeared next to the dreaming commander. Leon instantly felt ashamed, because all this time he had been mentally discussing his friend. In this awkward state, the knights set out on their journey, as business was more important than emotions. They didn't talk at all along the way, as each was thinking about something of their own. Lucia remembered from a past life that all the inhabitants of this village had to be evacuated. This place will soon be burned to the ground to prevent the spread of monsters. Therefore, this whole journey now seemed to the heroine a waste of her precious time. However, it was too late to retreat, so for the sake of her daughter, Madame concentrated on the task. However, the hotel they were assigned in the order was only suitable for couples in love. Lucia was little embarrassed by this circumstance, because while working, she did not pay attention to anything. But even such a cold woman as Claire could not help but be embarrassed by the surrounding environment. They were immediately greeted by the hospitable Wren, who offered the couple a single room. His mother quickly reacted and scolded the child for behaving so indelicately towards the guests. In response, the boy gave an example that all their visitors, without exception, were traitors. Lucia and Leon watched this altercation in shock, which made them blush. In the end, the woman quickly dealt with Wren, who had shown so much rudeness to the customers. She herself offered the guests the best shared room with a beautiful view from the window. To this, Ruvens, with a red face, objected that they were not at all in such a relationship with the lady. But Claire herself didn't understand what was so special about them being in the same room temporarily. The woman had no intention of harming her partner, who was still afraid of something. It was only when Leon explained that they were on a mission that the attitude towards them changed a little. But even so, there was only one room, which again did not bother the heroine at all. Watching the beautiful woman from the side, the man did not find the courage to be near her. So he tried one last time to find another room, which was unsuccessful. Leon could not have imagined that random events would bring him and Lucia closer together so quickly. Meanwhile, the commander of the Dark Knights had already prepared for a short rest. No matter how embarrassed Ruvens was, the heroine did not listen to his vague speeches about living. The man said he could not afford to sleep next to the mother of a small child. This expression completely confused Lucia, who was not strong in the rules of conduct. Red as a lobster, Ruvens seemed to the heroine to be a stranger person with each passing second. She took his words about her as a woman as an insult to her knightly dignity. But then the door was opened by General Halbert Wingham, who had heard the entire conversation perfectly well. At the sight of the commander-in-chief, both knights were shocked to the depths of their souls, because they did not know about him. It turned out that the old man had arrived in this problematic place in advance to meet his charges. With his sarcastic words, he only made the already red-faced Leon even more embarrassed. But all of Halbert's fun was interrupted by Lucia, who was not in the mood for jokes and laughter. Only after her remark did Wingham explain that they were using the building as a secret base. The reason the old man called the best knights was because he needed the core of the black corruption. Ruvens was quite experienced when it came to magic, but even he had never seen anything like this. Meanwhile, even such a tiny core could easily destroy many kilometers of land. Gelbert did not naively hope that they could master this material, but he hoped for Lucia's help in fighting the monsters to find something similar. The heroine was very interested in experiments with the core, because this way she could save Nia. Much as Wingham wanted to help, he was called to the palace on extremely urgent business. But before leaving, the old man asked Leon to go out to give Madame some instructions. Lucia winced slightly at this, because the general had a sharp tongue, and the first thing he started with was asking where the woman had picked up the dark-haired child. He had no doubt that the girl did not really belong to Lucia, but even to such a close person, Claire could not admit that she was harboring a real saint. Helbert didn't believe a single word from the woman, who was completely incapable of lying to anyone. But what frightened the heroine most was that the old man knew about the baby's sacred power. She was still worried that no one could be trusted with a matter that concerned the girl. This is because anyone could report her to the emperor for their own benefit. But then, the heroine received a strong slap on the back of the head from a wise and senior officer. The woman stared at Wingham in surprise as he asked her to stop lying to everyone. The general admitted that he was very worried about the condition of his ward, although he was too busy. He reminded that Madame could always consult him about anything if necessary. Before, Helbert thought he knew Lucia better than anyone, but now it was as if he was seeing her for the first time. The old man's head was filled with too many questions about the knight's recent actions, but he would like Lucia to trust her elder brother now, as much as she once did. Meanwhile, Leon was examining the bath bombs that Ren had slipped him. It was the first time the man had seen such a product for lovers, and its very appearance embarrassed him. He was so lost in his dreams that he didn't even notice how the innkeeper approached him from behind. The woman was convinced that this young man had fallen in love with his cold-blooded partner, so she whispered to him that in the nearby forest, there were stones created for love magic. All Leon had to do was write the name of his beloved on one of these stones. As they talked, Ruvens didn't realize that the crowd around him was gradually getting closer. Because of his handsome appearance, the man often became an object of attention for people. But this time, the commoners pressed especially hard, which almost caused Leon to panic. And at that very moment, Lucia appeared next to him and covered the knight's head with his hood. Only with the appearance of Kluwer was the man able to come to his senses and collect his thoughts about what was happening. He couldn't resist and tenderly hugged the woman, who had no idea about his feelings for her. Even now, Lucia took this gesture as a friendly reassurance for the knight, as if the man could remember now the incident that happened when he was 17 years old. Every time he attended a banquet, he came under the close attention of the aristocrats. And Leon couldn't stand so many glances at himself, so he usually ran away in panic. That day was no exception for the boy who was simply looking for his parents in that place. He himself did not notice how someone asked him how many years he had not been able to talk to his relatives. Without thinking, Leon began to share his problems, when he suddenly realized what was happening. Next to him stood a girl who said that she had never seen her father in her life. It was young Lucia, who had no idea at that moment what the future held for her. It was a revelation to the young man that someone could live completely without their parents nearby. Suddenly, he noticed that the lady's snow-white dress was splashed with bloody wine. He realized with horror that he had accidentally spilled it on the girl when he ran away in panic. But she wasn't at all angry at him, since she hadn't planned on wearing dresses anyway. Moreover, the lady acted as if she did not know about the incident involving the young man. Since then, Leon has lost all opportunity to see his parents, which he was very worried about. That is why he came to ball after ball, to at least somehow meet his adults. Suddenly, a beautiful stranger offered the guy a glass with a mint leaf. She explained that this thing masks the terrible smell from the mouth of people around her. As soon as the future magician accepted this modest gift, much in his life changed. So for the first time in a long time, the guy laughed sincerely, without fear of being judged by anyone. Leon admitted to the girl that he had long needed someone who would treat him normally. And during all this time, Madame did not change a bit, since she was still worried about her partner. Ruvens never forgot everything that the commander had done to him, without her realizing it. The man was tormented by the question of whether there was still anything left of that girl in Kluwer, but he would never in his life dare to talk about such a thing, so he simply smiled at her. At that moment, a man burst into the room, unable to find the two children anywhere. It turned out that one of them was the innkeeper's son, who had gone into the forest to collect stones. The knights could not ignore this trouble, although they had a slightly different task. It took Leon only a few seconds to decide to help the poor residents. He demonstrated his powers and explained that he could try to find the children in the forest. At this point, Leon's face changed so much due to concentration that he was unrecognizable. The man who had lost his children instantly calmed down at the sight of the knight's powerful magic. Meanwhile, Ruvens directed the cocoon of light along the trail of the missing boys in order to find them. The man had no doubt that Lucia would support his decision to go on a search, all because their path still lay through the forest in order to find the core of the black corruption. The partners remained silent the entire way, as each of them was too focused on the task. But then they came across a fork in the road that Leon could not have foreseen in advance. Clure quickly realized that the best thing for them to do would be to split up for a while to search. Unlike Reuven's, the heroine moved through the forest, cutting through the withered branches with her sword. The heroine remembered that even monsters had a hard time living in this place due to constant hunger. But it was precisely for this reason that the creatures were the most cruel, because they really wanted to survive. However, for a sword master like Lucia, all these creatures posed no danger. Then the woman heard a clearly childish voice coming from somewhere nearby. She tried to scout out the situation first, before revealing her location. But Madame didn't expect that there would be so many people of the priestly races in the forest. Someone else was looking for the dark crystal, and they were people Lucia knew nothing about. She noticed that the man in white had begun to extract the magic from the stone she needed. The heroine understood that every second counted, so she didn't wait for Leon. Upon seeing the unknown enemy, the mages quickly erected a simple barrier to contain it. But Clure, with just one swing of her sword, destroyed this defense to the ground. The children found themselves right next to a woman who suddenly appeared from the forest with monsters. They were so scared that they couldn't say anything because they had experienced tremendous stress. The heroine shielded the children with her body so that no other magicians could touch them. The woman didn't know that the priest in white knew very well how strong she was. That's why he gave the order for everyone else to protect him from Clure to the last. The chief magician needed time to at least partially absorb the crystal's energy. The heroine watched this with horror, because such energy was deadly for a person. So the commander had no idea what kind of mage was capable of withstanding such power. But first, Lucia had to deal with the wizards who had built the barrier again. She cut through with ease until she heard a child scream behind her again. It turned out that one of the monsters had quietly grabbed a small child in the hopes of devouring him. Every instinct in Clure demanded that she rescue the baby from the creature's clutches. But the law of chivalry said that the mission should always be above human sacrifice. That is why the sword trembled in the hands of the heroine, who was in grave doubt. She was torn between the desire to save the baby and to fulfill her duty with dignity. As soon as the madam heard the boy calling for his mother, she cast aside all her prejudices. Ren was glad that everything turned out well with his little brother in the end, even though he couldn't protect him. The boy felt guilty that the knight had to waste time rescuing them. But Madame had no intention of blaming the child for making her mission more difficult. At that moment, Leon appeared nearby in time and began to provide support to Clure. As soon as Reuven's appeared, Lucia felt much more confident with her cover. She began to hit the barrier, and the mages inside it as it let the power through. But the heroine didn't expect that, very soon, she would have no one to continue the fight with. All the people inside the barrier suddenly turned to ashes, as if they had never been there. And in the place of the magician in the white cloak, there was nothing left but a reduced crystal. But Lucia was glad to have this piece of dark matter, which they could study further. Leon quickly surveyed the area and noticed that there were remnants of black magic in the air. It was an incredible art that the emperor had banned many years ago. But right now, the knights had to return the children to their parents, who were very worried. Many immediately thought that it was the handsome young man who was behind the children's rescue. But the boys themselves gratefully threw themselves into the arms of Lucia, who stood to the side. The innkeeper could not help but thank the woman who had helped her so much. Meanwhile, in the Baron family's house, their own small game events were taking place. Yvonne was upset with her friend because she had combed the doll's hair incorrectly. So now the red-haired girl was a little offended by the sad and unhappy little girl. The saint behaved this way because she missed her mother very much, because she had left her. And Yvonne's mother understood the lady's feelings perfectly, so she tried her best to console her. For some reason, Nia began to doubt that Lucia would really take her back. This deeply touched Julie, who was quite an emotional woman. Therefore, the madam began to console the little girl even more intensely, as she had become completely dejected. With this behavior, Nia finally showed how much worry was inside her. The saint still had not gotten rid of her anxiety, and therefore was afraid of being left completely alone. Then a cheerful Yvonne, who had recently had a brilliant idea, ran into the room. The girl brought with her some hair lotion, which she was going to use on the doll's hair. Julie didn't immediately notice that the smell of this product was suspiciously familiar to her. It turned out that Yvonne had stolen this thing from her mother without even asking any permission. Meanwhile, this lotion was the best and most expensive in the empire, so Madame took care of it. The two knights' task was not yet completed, so they went into the forest. Lucia's only thought was to quickly complete this monster-clearing task. Therefore, she paid little attention to the thoughtful Leon, who silently followed her. The whole point was that the man received a love stone from Ren in gratitude for saving him. He even wrote Clure's name on it to make sure he would attract the woman's attention in the future. But the knight was not tired of anything other than carrying out the task next to the commander. With the help of magic, he quickly dispelled the remnants of the black energy that had settled in the forest. And then an incredibly beautiful view of nature, which had been hidden, opened up before Reuven's. Almost all of the dark matter was lost, as the knights took its core with them. And now the pollen from the flowers spread beautifully among the trees, cleansing the contaminated area. Leon was glad that the general and the emperor found a way to at least somehow help this area. But for some reason, Claire didn't smile. Even though there were so many beautiful things around in the forest, the heroine thought that if the holy trees were destroyed, she would not have to give up Nia. But she didn't yet know her enemies by sight, so she was in no hurry to take such actions. Leon watched from the side as Lucia became tense and wanted to confess his feelings to her, but he concluded that it was too early to burden a woman with a relationship. Due to his thoughtfulness, the man did not immediately notice the unpleasant sound coming from somewhere above. It turned out that one of the birds was infected, so it tried to attack the knights. But Lucy, with one wave of her hand, dealt with the unfortunate animal that could not be helped. Before dying, the crow suddenly burst into flames, which was abnormal for an infected creature. This led the knights to believe that there was something else they did not know about the matter. But at this point, the task was temporarily completed, so they had to return back. Reuven's was in no hurry to move away from the lake, as he had a worthwhile business with it. The man did not want to resort to such methods, but he no longer saw any other way out. So he threw a pebble into the lake, hoping that the magic of the place would work on Lucia. And that very evening, Claire returned for her daughter, who was incredibly happy about it. But the commander had no idea that in her absence, the squad of knights had set up a small business. Only Alterath stood up to the knights, who took money for the opportunity to see Lucia. He intended to return everything he had received back to the residence, so as not to profit from the commander. But at that very moment, another 30 gold coins fell into the jug, which was too much. It turned out that one of the Yellow Knights had paid a fee for a duel with the swordmaster himself. It was a woman named Reve, who was reputed to be the best in her knightly troop. The heroine had no intention of participating in such machinations that required her to accept the fight. Although the assistants tried to persuade the commander, she remained just as adamant. At that moment, the Yellow Deputy ran up to the Dark Squad, offering his apologies. He dragged Revy away with him so that she would not disturb the peace anymore. Imagine the surprise of the other knights when the woman announced that she wanted to transfer. She was confident that Lucia was stronger than her commander, so she wanted to serve her. However, all of Revy's applications for transfer were not even considered, despite her loyalty. Lucia remembered that it took this strange woman a long time to hone her skills. That's why she didn't want to add another insane person to her crazy squad. A few hours later, the heroine went to the Emperor's deputy for answers. The old man greeted the best swordmaster in the Empire with a smile, and he had a good opinion of him. Clure was still outraged that she was the one sent on the mission with the curse, although Phaedron was sure that no one could have handled the task better than her. It turned out that only that lake in the forest, for some reason, was not susceptible to any damage. Lucia immediately realized that if she told the residents about this, a war would start for this place. But until then, the tree and the lake are planned to be carefully guarded by the remaining knights. It's all because those unknown magicians in priestly robes tried to destroy that place. The heroine immediately remembered that it was the inhabitants of poor villages who were the first to recover from the curse. But all this was a question of her past life, so the woman had many uncertainties. With a sly smile, the elder Reuven's recalled that this was the first time Lucia had been thanked. Claire still remembered with warmth the moment she made the right choice. All her past life, the knight had chosen the sword over the heart, but from that moment on, everything changed. And now, the heroine had something that she wanted with all her heart to protect from any misfortune. The old man's words did not leave the madam's head, even when she returned home to her daughter. She was grateful to Phaedorin for the opportunity to understand herself a little. But then Nia attracted her mother's attention because she refused to eat healthy vegetables. Lucia didn't find anything wrong with this and calmly ate everything her daughter left on the plate. Then the little girl reminded that she hadn't done her homework. But this didn't surprise her mother either. And when the girl suddenly asked the woman for water and something sweet, she became even more delighted. Before, the lady never dared to demand anything other than what she had already been given. The only problem was that Nia couldn't understand why her mother didn't scold her for her actions. She remembered that in Yvonne's family, the girl was punished for bad behavior every day. So the little girl also wanted to hear scolding from her mother in order to believe in her love. At that very moment, Mia appeared on the threshold of her friend's room with a brilliant idea. The girl joyfully threw herself into the arms of her older sister, whom she had loved since the orphanage. But even the girl couldn't understand why the little girl wanted to be scolded so much. To this, the lady admitted that Yvonne was constantly scolded and had never been kicked out of the house. Mia could understand this desire to prove parental love in all the children from the orphanage, so she was going to turn her friend into a real bad girl in a short period of time. Meanwhile, Lucia was reading a parenting book and had no idea about the children's plan. Soon the woman heard strange sounds coming from her daughter's room, where she was supposed to be sleeping. In a few seconds, the alarmed heroine reached the right place and opened the doors. But she couldn't even imagine that the girls would ruin the room so much in such a short time. Mia and Nia were eagerly awaiting punishment from strict Lucia to believe in her love. But unfortunately, Madame recently read that children should not be scolded, even if they have done something bad. She had no idea that her loyal behavior was only making things worse for the saint. The older one was not calmed down by this answer and began to destroy everything around her. The plates began to smash on the floor one after another, as Mia was ready to do anything for punishment, while Claire wondered in surprise if the girls really didn't like it here that much. In the end, it was Nia who broke down first, begging her little sister to stop her hysteria. Only after some time did the heroine realize what the children were really expecting from her. She gave the command to take the rider's stance, and the little one immediately understood what to do. But it came as a surprise to Mia that she, too, had to carry out this strange punishment. Claire had no intention of making any allowances for the girls, who were supposed to live in peace, not in conflict. Despite the strenuous physical exercise, Nia performed it with a joyful smile. Soon the girl fell asleep from extreme fatigue, but was glad that her mother loved her. The woman did not disturb the baby, although she could have eased her condition with a massage. At the moment, Nia was sleeping so sweetly and comfortably that no one would dare to wake her up. Then, Mia remembered about an important meeting, the leaflet for which she had taken with her. Claire had no idea that her daughter had such an amazing event on her schedule. So the help of the girl who looked after Nia in kindergarten was very helpful to her. It turned out that tomorrow, the Empress was organizing a gathering of all representatives of the girls' class. Leon knew about this event in advance, so he was fully prepared the next morning. He thought out his secret mission, with a gift for his beloved commander in detail. Thanks to his good preparation, the man immediately met Lucia, who appeared from the back door. But the heroine was in such a hurry to get to the meeting that she didn't even spare a couple of minutes for her friend. The woman's beautiful outfit suited her also, because she rarely wore anything like it. Just in case, Leon decided to keep an eye on Claire, who had completely captured his attention. Lucia tried to attract as few people to herself as possible, as she did not want to communicate. Reuven saw this perfectly well from the side, which is why he did not dare to approach the madame first. But then the commander of the White Knights was noticed by his acquaintance, who suddenly approached from behind. The man didn't want to admit that he had been following Nia's mother all this time. So, to divert attention, he gave Marian a gift, just so that she wouldn't tell anyone anything. Reuven lied anxiously that he had long wanted to thank her for Caesar's trust in him. But in reality, all this was done to make the woman leave as quickly as possible. But in her joy, she began to chat cheerfully with such a pleasant and sensitive acquaintance. The commander was furious when he heard that the young princess went to the same kindergarten as Lucia's daughter. He had not known before that the prince had taken advantage of this opportunity to take the children together. Meanwhile, many people gathered at the Empress's private estate for a common event. The aristocrats behaved extremely friendly, as they wanted to make a good impression. The heroine responded with the same pleasant behavior, although she was confused in such company. She tried to actively pretend that she was interested in this kind of communication with people. But many still suspected a trick in the woman who came to the meeting for the first time. Meanwhile, the children were having a good time in each other's company on the kindergarten grounds. First, Siren corrected Nia's behavior, who was still confused about how to act correctly. Then Yvonne, who always took mistakes calmly, told the little girl what to do. Watching all this, Emily prayed that every day of theirs would be just as quiet. And the girls discussed with interest what their parents were eating at that moment during the meeting. Only the princess was sure that there was nothing interesting to eat there. Yvonne began to laugh at how quickly her anxious mother was gaining weight. Roy Whitney laughed the hardest at this, although he didn't mean anything bad. But Siren was hurt by this whole story, because not long ago the maid had limited her portions. That's why the girl flared up because of such a simple joke that accidentally touched her to the depths of her soul. The little girl tried to explain to her friend that many were sensitive about the topic of excess weight, but Yvonne only laughed louder at the idea of someone getting seriously fat. As a result, the entire kindergarten began to hear the shouts of children arguing and quarreling with each other. At this moment, the Empress's assistant informed everyone that the hall was ready for visiting. No one knew what to expect from a woman who, because of her beauty, became the emperor's wife. For some reason, the room to which the noble ladies were invited was completely devoid of light. But in the center, everything sparkled and shone from the oversaturation of music and beautiful spotlights. The aristocrats looked around in confusion, not understanding what was happening around them. Literally, a few seconds later, Empress Rubina descended gracefully from above towards them. She had incredible flexibility and dexterity, so she easily managed the descent, after which the woman joyfully announced that she had prepared such a beautiful banquet for everyone. However, the noble ladies considered such preparation to be a real vulgarity towards them. Lucia was in the center of the crowd, so she heard every poisonous word addressed to the ruler. Because Albert loved the lady too much, she never learned any manners, being a commoner. So it was not surprising that none of the aristocrats had any respect for her. But Rubina herself stubbornly pretended not to notice the sidelong glances and whispers directed at her. The woman did not come to the event empty-handed, as she had prepared gifts for everyone. But none of them were happy about such a surprise, which would have compromised many. Claire was one of the last to unpack the box, so she didn't yet know what all the screaming was about. It turned out that the Empress presented an unusual shirt as a gift. No lady would ever in her life allow herself to wear such the latest fashion, while Rubina considered it natural to please her husband with such a beautiful outfit. Even the aloof Lucia knew it was a poor choice of gift for a children's gathering. When it was time to get some fresh air, the aristocrats seriously considered throwing away their shirts, and only the heroine noticed that Rubina was cautiously eavesdropping on all their condemnations from behind the door. In fact, the ladies wanted the Empress to hear their words, which they conveyed. The commander felt genuinely sorry for the woman who was so helpless against criticism. That's why she carefully slipped away from the company, so as not to see the tear-stained face. Lucia got out through the back door so that no one could stop her. But then, Madame felt the country air within the palace, which greatly embarrassed her. The commander was sure that she smelled cows and hay, but she considered it impossible. So Lucia followed with interest in the direction of the strange smells and sounds. But in fact, in the backyard of Rubina's estate, Clure found a real barnyard. Madame sincerely could not understand what the animals were doing in such a majestic place. But what bothered the heroine most was that she still heard such unwanted crying. When the Empress threw herself into Lucia's arms, she realized that she had nowhere to run. And Rubina began to complain loudly about how she could never forget her childhood on the farm. Claire had great patience, so she listened calmly to all the ladies' lamentations. The most offensive thing for the emperor's wife was that everyone around her only criticized her. Meanwhile, the woman would like to know what should have been done in this or that situation. Then Lucia hinted that the shirt was not the best gift for a children's gathering. As soon as Rubina realized this, she burst into tears even more loudly from fear of being ostracized in society. Suddenly, advice came from the Empress's son, who suggested that his mother open his father's palace to everyone. From the outside, it seemed like this idea was full of meaningless nonsense, but the prince was smart. He firmly believed that any parent would want to show their child the imperial palace. It was precisely through this that the man intended to regain the loyalty of the embittered aristocrats. Lucia couldn't help but agree that Irene's plan was indeed going to work. Rubina was so delighted with the offer that she ran to implement it right away. The woman sincerely wanted to make friends with the ladies, who always looked at her askance. Therefore, she informed them about the opening of the imperial palace at the next meeting. This caused a great deal of joy among the adults, who had never been to the emperor's house before. What surprised the aristocrats most was that even the imperial garden would be open to them. One of the women was so enthusiastic that she suggested inviting actors to perform for the children. Only the most envious lady could not openly rejoice at the general enthusiasm. The empress expected that everyone would take her proposal calmly, but she encountered objections. It turned out that this lady named Eileen was not sure that Reuben had such authority. But the empress had never been bound by any rules, so she was genuinely surprised by Madame's words. The aristocrat heard that during one trip, Rubina was caught in the slums. The emperor's wife had no idea that such strange rumors were being spread about her, so she hastened to tell that the secret meeting was her husband's initiative. As a result, women were quickly dealt with by the empress's story, which remained true. Meanwhile, passions were flaring up in the kindergarten, the screams from which could be heard outside. The children decided who each of them would play for, and each wanted a good role for themselves. Yvonne was going to become the princess of this empire because she believed that she was worthy. But then the girl heard laughter from the side, because one person took her words as a joke. She was a true daughter of the emperor, and no one could have played this role better. But Byrne didn't lose her composure and suggested that Siren play as the princess of a completely different country. Since the red-haired lady convinced Eldarion that the lady was very beautiful, she agreed, while the knights silently shouted that the emperor's daughter should not have done this. But the children's game continued, and Yvonne, as the leader, distributed the remaining roles. Here Nia expressed her desire to play as the Dark Knight, which was her mother. The girl did not expect that even the boys did not want to take on such an unpleasant role. The children surrounded the little girl and began to tell her scary things about the squad of Black Knights. This quickly made Nia burst into tears, because she sincerely loved all of her mother's helpers. Only Caesar guessed that these knights were important to the lady, so he supported her. Siren also stood up for her friend, allowing her to introduce the great dark monster. Hearing the approval of her friends, the saint immediately wiped away the tears that had welled up in her eyes. Let's take a quick look at the events that were just now taking place in the emperor's office. Albert was glad that his son was winning the battle for the heart of the cold Lucia for now. He saw it in the enraged face of Phaedorin, who did not accept any defeats well. In his head, the emperor had already decided that the wedding of Aaron and Cluer must definitely take place. That is why the ruler sent his daughter to exactly the same class where Nia was. Reuven's was the only one who dared to eavesdrop on the conversations of his masters. The other knights were even afraid for the condition of the old man, who for some reason was behaving strangely. But Phaedorin himself was sure that such stupid plans of the emperor were not destined to come true. But he was still worried that the prince and ruler could overshadow his insecure son. Meanwhile, the heroine remembered that there was clearly a priest present on her mission. She managed to wound the white mage in the palm, and now she wanted to find such a person in the temple. The wound from the sword's aura could not heal easily, even with all the possibilities of holy healing. Therefore, Lucia had no doubt that she would be able to recognize that white magician. At the entrance to the temple, she was met by the friendly priest Mordo, who always saw off guests. But even he didn't believe that Madame simply wanted to offer a prayer to the great god. While the man was speaking, the heroine looked closely at his hand, but did not see anything suspicious. Mordo suddenly apologized for having once conducted an investigation into Cluer's daughter. It was the first time the commander had seen someone so directly admit to their unpleasant misdeed. But this priest was honest not only before God, but also before the people around him. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by the prince, who followed Lucia almost everywhere. He exchanged a few words with the priests and then asked him to leave. Irene still hoped that he would be able to charm this woman with his appearance. The man thanked Cluer for supporting his mother when others were judging her. The madam remembered that the emperor's son, in his past life, was one of those who tried to restore the land. So it was no surprise that Irene constantly moved from words to concrete actions. But the heroine did not respond to all the prince's strange proposals that were not related to saving the country. But Leon's assistants could not ignore the fact that Aaron had been appointed interim manager. As sad as this made Reuven's feel, he had no reason to oppose the emperor's will. Therefore, the man asked his assistants not to focus so much on what was happening. He himself felt awkward because his loyal knights were worried about his feelings for Commander Lucia. Suddenly, the girls realized that their master had already hinted to the woman about what he was feeling. Leon did not want to openly say that he had not received any concrete answer, since the time was not right. However, the assistants themselves decided that the lack of an answer did not deprive Reuven's of a further favorable fate. They recalled that there was a moment when a woman was the first to approach the commander, despite the people around her. It was because of them that the knight decided that Lucia desperately needed a husband, although she did not want to admit it to anyone. Moreover, one of the girls already had a great plan on how to attract Claire's attention. She happily shared it with the commander, not expecting such care from an ordinary knight. At this moment, the heroine and her daughter were strolling through the city streets in search of various delicacies. Most of all, Nia wanted to visit her friend's pastry shop, but the line there was incredibly huge. Lucia knew they could stand there all evening and still not get even one tasty cookie. The girl became noticeably sad because she couldn't wait to try the sweets. So the commander distracted the little girl with a walk, when suddenly she herself smelled the pleasant smell of cookies. They began working together to find an equally delicious sweet whose aroma was in the air. The little girl quickly found out which window this delicious and sweet smell of cookies was coming from. She had previously heard a lot from Yvonne about similar delicacies, which were also made in her family bakery. That's why Nia was able to easily list to her mother the names of her favorite sweets on the counter outside the window. Suddenly, the red-haired Byrne herself appeared outside the window, having for some reason been inside all this time. Lucia was a little wary of the unexpected appearance of the girl, who always brought with her a lot of fuss. And now she called her friends to follow her, not thinking at all that they might have other plans. Only on the way did Madame realize that they were heading to Yvonne's grandfather, who was the head of a pastry shop. It turned out that the girl had once again run away from her relative because she was bored. The old man had a businesslike character, so he immediately became interested in whom the lady had brought to him. The heroine quickly introduced herself and apologized for any inconvenience they had caused. But the pastry chef himself, named Finn Byrne, was only interested in the dark hair of the newcomer. While Lucia tried not to show that she knew the old man, he carefully studied her appearance. Nia didn't even dare to take a proper look at this stern adult her friend had brought her to. Grandfather immediately said that the guests could leave if this was their way of getting ahead of the queue outside. Claire didn't want to create a conflict with this important person, so she just said goodbye to him. In fact, Nia really wanted to try the sweets that were sold in the chef's pastry shop. Yvonne noticed this, so she ran up to her friend to whisper a little secret in her ear. The girl knew the old man well, so she advised the lady on how exactly to address him. The little girl quickly gained courage because she had such good support in the form of her grandfather's granddaughter. So she asked him with a sweet expression to give her at least one tasty cookie. Finn instantly blushed to the tips of his ears at the sight of such an adorable child. The old man's only weakness was quiet and obedient children, so he was unable to resist. Yvonne took advantage of this constantly, although she could rarely be called a good daughter to her parents. Hearing all this, the heroine was once again surprised at why her daughter and this lady became friends. The famous chef's pastry shop amazed Nia to the depths of her soul as soon as she saw its interior from the inside. The old man, with a gentle smile, allowed the guest to choose any cookie that suited her taste. Yvonne immediately offered her friend several sweet options that she considered the most delicious. But the little girl froze in front of the main attraction of this room. She even stopped paying attention to the words of little Byrne, who tried for her. As soon as the lady suggested that Lucia didn't allow Nia sweets, Finn immediately became indignant about it. But in reality, it was all because the timid and impressionable saint was delighted. For a long time, she could not believe that she could really choose anything. The next morning, a special formation of knights was assembled in front of the heroine's estate. But the commander turned out to be busy at the wrong time, so the assistants spent most of the time idle. It was because Irene had been hovering around Lucia this morning, hoping for a warm conversation. He was delighted that he had managed to secure for himself a position so close to the commander of the Dark Knights. The heir was not embarrassed by the fact that he was interfering with the overall construction process with his conversations with Kluwer. The heroine could not feel joy at that moment, since few people respected her squad with its dark past. The woman's soul was drawn towards the kindergarten, where her beloved daughter was now. But the assistants did not give Madame the opportunity to see her, because it was impossible to reveal their identities. Although Madame understood that their arguments were logical, she already wanted to talk about herself. However, the knights did everything to ensure that none of the children understood what structure Nia's mother belonged to. That was why Vernon was so insistent that Lucia not ruin their disguise with her emotions. But in reality, the heroine could not find peace because of a situation that happened quite recently. Just yesterday, Nia couldn't sleep because she was worried about going to the Imperial Palace. Lucia had always been a light sleeper, so she woke up because of the girl's constant tossing and turning. Only after the question did the little girl admit to her worries, which she considered empty and useless. Claire had no idea that the girl wanted to attend such an event so much. But then Nia added that she would be very happy when she saw her beloved mother in the palace. Despite the little girl's shining eyes, the woman did not feel the same inspiration. The next morning, all the children were excited about visiting the Imperial Palace. Only one princess was sad because she had just left home and then returned home again. She was a little amused by Nia, who reminded her that her mother also worked as an assistant to the emperor. But the little girl remembered how badly others spoke about the knights, so she was afraid to admit it. But then the girls were called out by an adult male voice, who had heard part of their conversation. It turned out to be Crown Prince Aaron, who tried to please Nia in his favorite ways as well. Therefore, he reported that the baby's mother plays an important role in the position of an imperial knight. The saint was sincerely amazed that at least someone did not consider her mother's profession shameful and low. Everyone had to bow properly before the prince, but the teacher remembered this too late. However, Irene did not pay attention to this, because he wanted to introduce the children to the symbols of this day. The kids turned in the indicated direction with interest, as they had heard about the actors. They turned out to be not very natural dolls in the form of a lion, an eagle, and an owl, life-size. But no one expected that children would suddenly be frightened by such scary and evil-looking animal figures. Eldarion had no backup plan in case the little ones couldn't accept the dolls. But then, a not very noticeable, but perceptible magical air began to blow on the actors, who did not understand anything. It turned out that it was Leon who took care of making it look like he was cleaning out these terrible monsters. The man winked at the children and assured them that now they had nothing at all to fear from the dolls. The last person Irene expected was this man, who was his direct rival in the fight for Lucia's love. But the aristocrats were very impressed at the sight of the two most handsome men of the empire at once. They even envied Teacher Tangst, who dressed up especially beautifully for today. But the woman herself wasn't sure that Commander Ruvens would even look at her once. It was obvious to her that the mage had come here only for Lucia and Nia, which even smacked of obsession. But the man himself did not notice anything like this in himself, and cheerfully told the story of the Imperial Castle. Leon was quite good at public speaking, so it wasn't difficult for him to explain everything in an interesting way. Then, women who were the parents of some of the children in the group looked out of the castle window. Caesar was very happy to see his mother waving to him from the window, as this was pleasant for any child. But neither the princess nor the saint had yet seen their mothers among the adults looking out of the window. Although Nia didn't notice Lucia anywhere, she was delighted when they announced the transition to the knights' platforms. All groups of children enjoyed the performance prepared for them by the castle's assistants. Yvonne constantly encouraged her friend, sparking her interest in this large-scale event. But even on the training ground among the knights, the little girl did not notice her mother. The knights did a brilliant job of demonstrating the full mastery of their skills, which they had honed for so long, and only Nia could not share the joy of all the other children, who were delighted. When it was time to move on to the next event, the lady looked around for a long time. She seemed incredibly confused because she couldn't find the one person she needed anywhere. Vernon and Jillian happily showed their faces to her to support the girl with their presence. But even this could not please Nia, who thought sadly about where Lucia was now. The assistants thought that the commander was among them, as they noticed the aura from her sharp blade. It turned out that Kluwer's place had been taken by the capable Heath, who was able to fake her ability for a short time. The guy easily demonstrated once again this unusual skill, which he mastered. However, the question remained as to where Lucia had gone if she was not among the demonstration performances. The strangeness continued among the actors in costume, who noticed their comrade's strange behavior. The men felt uneasy when they sensed a powerful, murderous aura from the man in the eagle costume, but they attributed this to the fact that it was difficult for him to put on this uncomfortable suit on his own. Meanwhile, Leon brought all the children to a beautiful greenhouse, which was maintained by all the emperor's gardeners. Caesar, more than anyone else, admired the clean air in this place, which easily filled his lungs. Siren immediately noticed this and concluded that the boy really was the only normal child. This is because almost everyone else was using rare trees as their games. The only thing that worried the princess was that Nia, next to her, never smiled once during the entire event. The emperor's daughter tried to support the baby by saying that her mother was also too busy to appear. Suddenly, she heard a familiar, gentle voice that affectionately and demandingly called her name. It turned out that Empress Rubina still found time to visit her beloved daughter. The little girl couldn't believe it until the very end, since Madame didn't even come to her birthday. But the ruler was no longer going to ignore her daughter, who so missed her presence. Nia watched her friend's happiness with joy, and she herself had not hoped for such a development of events. Here the woman noticed a dark-haired girl, whose mother she had known personally recently. She smiled tenderly at the little girl, whom Siren had described as her best friend. Saint was pleased to hear that other families spoke well of her, even though she was just talking. Soon it was time for lunch for all the squads, which was not to be missed under any circumstances. Yvonne was so eager to try more desserts that she left her friend to guard their place. But the lady would have quickly become sad without friends if she had not heard a familiar voice right in front of her. It turned out that Leon had noticed the little girl, who was sitting all alone in the clearing. Nia immediately assured the man that she would be okay when she finally saw her mother. Then, Rubens very opportunely offered the girl a bracelet that lit up when Lucia was nearby. He admitted that he wanted to give it to her earlier, but he couldn't find a good time. The saint looked in surprise at the enchanted woman, the likes of which she had never seen in her life. When Nia finally refused the gift, it was Leon's turn to be surprised by something he didn't expect. But the little girl confidently stated that she didn't need the item, since her mother could find it anywhere anyway. Suddenly, the man heard other children calling out to him. Thinking Leon was a real beauty, Caesar was truly proud to be related to Rubens, albeit a rather distant one. The other boys expressed respect for the commander, whom each of them would like to emulate. Therefore, the man had to leave the girl alone so as not to attract unnecessary attention to her. The children managed the picnic perfectly well without the adults, who often dictated boring rules to them. And none of them suspected that Lucia, dressed as an eagle, was watching the kids from the side. She saw how much delicious food her daughter had, but she still felt like Nia was being deprived. Although the little girl was among her close friends, she, like everyone else, wanted to see her mother. Meanwhile, Yvonne was bragging about the desserts her grandfather had given her for this important event. When Siren heard that the girls had seen each other without her, she reacted extremely emotionally. The princess wanted to spend more time with her friends, but she couldn't afford it because of her responsibilities. As soon as Eldarion left briefly, offended, Yvonne heard a caustic voice from the side. It turned out that she had been approached by an older lady named Fiona, who considered herself better than everyone else. She saw that Byrne's face did not reflect a drop of respect, so she decided to teach the girl a lesson. Neither Yvonne nor Nia wanted any unpleasant conflicts with their elders on this interesting day for them. But the fair-haired miss had already decided for herself that she would not leave until the younger ones were sufficiently humiliated. The little girls couldn't do anything until 3 children took the most delicious sweets from them. Fiona enjoyed watching the panic and resentment on the faces of the ladies who did not obey her. Meanwhile, the girls' brothers began throwing delicious donuts in different directions. Nia was so upset by what was happening that she was ready to burst into tears at any moment. As soon as the little girl cried out for help, an eagle appeared out of nowhere and deftly caught all the cakes. The children were delighted with this little performance, although it was not at all originally planned. But in the end, Claire, in a bird costume, was able to safely return all the scattered treats to her daughter. However, the woman could not simply allow the older children to get away with it in such a situation, so she picked up one of the impudent children in her arms, which the boy was not at all happy about. He became even more frightened when he realized that the eagle's giant mouth was getting closer to him. Despite all the objections, Claire pretended to try to eat the boy whole. The girls watched in surprise at the brave monster, who, for some reason, was protecting them. But the animal's lack of rights did not last long, as soon the knights came to the rescue. They quickly freed the poor boy, who was so terrified he could barely say anything. The assistants promised to give the eagle a preventative talk so that no one would be afraid of him. After this, no one dared to approach Fiona's brother, who could not hold back his tears from fear. Soon all the children's attention was drawn to a theatrical performance in the center of the imperial palace. According to a pre-planned plot, the actors were supposed to tell the history of the empire. The children were delighted with the theater, as their parents rarely took them to such events. The knights were also sitting in the hall and were eagerly waiting for their squad to be introduced. Even the all-knowing Vernon didn't expect that the Dark Knights would be called almost traitors in history. According to the production, the Dark Knights were going to kill all the people who were captives. They did not listen to objections from their comrades, continuing to pursue their cruel line. As a result, even the most devoted children began to doubt whether it was worth loving such heroes. Byrne could not tolerate such obvious mockery towards his noble detachment, while the representatives of the other orders silently mocked their allies. Altharath wished well for the Dark Knights, although they were indeed created from bandits in the past. But when the man tried to contact the commander, he discovered that she was not there. The whole point was that Lucia once again used the cover of the eagle's clothing. The woman felt furious at the way her heroic squad was portrayed in history. Luckily for the heroine, she heard that one of the actors had just been injured during the performance. Madame immediately guessed that in front of her was the man playing her role in this play. So Lucia didn't hesitate and offered to replace the woman who couldn't walk. At first, the actress refused, since it was unlikely that an outsider could handle her role. However, Clure wasn't about to give up so quickly, so she removed the eagle mask from her head. Since she was a real black monster with dark hair, she was perfect. The woman had no idea that Leon had found out about her little prank with the performance. The man watched the commander out of curiosity and even joined the light man. Ruvens wanted to know why Lucia had acted so recklessly at an important event. Thanks to his eloquence, the magician managed to take the best place for an observation post. From above, Leon could clearly see every action of Clure, which made him uneasy. Meanwhile, Reuven's opponent could hardly contain the happiness that was bursting out of him from within. At the end of the concert, he came up with the idea of giving Lucia dolls with him and a lovely lady. The children were so absorbed in the performance that they hardly noticed anything around them. So only a few of them guessed that the character of the Dark Knight had been changed. Lucia immediately took action and first knocked out the actor next to her, so the Scarlet Knight fell to the ground. Although this was not planned in the original version, the children watched in horror as the Dark Knight gradually gained the upper hand over everyone. Despite her excellent knightly skills, the heroine was a very poor theater actor. Therefore, even the slow-witted Byrne immediately recognized the commander in the image of herself on stage. The other actors stared in panic at the woman who was changing the plot of the play on the fly. Irene couldn't have imagined that Lucia would suddenly surprise him so much. Although Leon was the one who was watching Clure the most, he too couldn't understand her motives at the moment. The only person who was happy to see Madame was Nia. She immediately recognized her mother in the image of the new actor, although she did not understand what was happening. Meanwhile, Lucia called on all the knights to fight together to ensure victory in the war. At the sight of the magic emanating from the sword, the children instantly forgot all their past fears. Ultimately, thanks to Clure's efforts, the Dark Knight also earned his reward at the end of the play. Aaron took advantage of this opportunity and nevertheless presented his gift to the commander. But then one of the actors, who had previously been unconscious, started throwing a tantrum about this. Lucia couldn't let him reveal all his cards to the audience, so she knocked the man out again. Byrne was the first to notice that this had caused the special mask to accidentally fall off Clure's face. Before the heroine could even say a word, the egg in her hands began to shine dazzlingly. While it was distracting the others, the woman managed to pull on her mask. She guessed that Leon was behind all this, and he had no idea about the gift inside the egg. But at the moment, the heroine was only concerned with the feelings of Naya, who looked at her with admiration. So the madam gave her daughter the burnt egg, as she was sure that it would make her happy. Lucia turned out to be absolutely right, since this gesture of attention was very important to the little girl. That's why she smiled happily for the first time during the entire event, because her mother was nearby. Right now, Claire couldn't stay near the girl, so she said goodbye for a while. Then she noticed that beautiful petals with magical energy were falling on her from somewhere above. Leon didn't expect the commander to figure out his little help to her so quickly. The man had no excuses for what he was doing in the actors' area. But even the prince did not care about his rival, as he was worried about the burnt dolls. Soon all the children went to the last element of the event, which was the ball. Actors in animal costumes were still present at the festival, although they no longer entertained anyone. They were glad to see their friend in the eagle costume, who had rejoined them too late. However, Leon, who wanted to take this role, did not allow his best friends to dance together. The man was sure that Lucia was still wearing a cover-up suit, which is why he was eager to dance. But then Eldarion approached Reuven's, and this time he was not going to lose. While the man in the eagle costume awkwardly watched the rivals, they continued to quarrel. Both Leon and Aaron fought with each other for the right to dance with the commander of the Dark Knights. None of them suspected that in fact there was a real actor in the costume. At that moment, the heroine herself had already gotten rid of the annoying eagle and was waiting for her daughter on the street. She thought with pleasure that she would like to repeat such a wonderful day again. That same evening, a secret meeting of priests was held in one of the secret halls of the church, and none of them were surprised when the Empress herself soon appeared on the threshold of the room. This is because she had been working for a long time with the high priest Ahilun, whose hand was damaged. Rubina dropped her usual mask of awkwardness because she was among serious people. This time the priest pleased his ally by wearing gloves, so there were no problems. The Empress was increasingly delighted with the keen mind of the priest she had chosen as a friend. Despite serving God, the man always set his priorities in favor of the lady. However, this time, she demanded that he find and bring back the precious leaf of Artyom. The ruler's wife, with a sly smile, said that soon many would be hunting for him. Ahilun could not resist even such incredibly difficult demands for him. It still remained a mystery to the priest, who Rubina herself had been working for all this time. But what worried him most was that he had accidentally been caught by Lucia on her last mission. The man could only pray that this meeting would not bring problems in the future. During his morning training, Vernon was not himself because an idea came to him. He tried to persuade Jillian to prove to everyone around them that they were not bad people at all. But Heath and Burl did not share such active actions without the official consent of the commander. All these people completely forgot to ask the opinion of the other knights and preferred not to interfere. Suddenly, Altharat's expression changed as he remembered how Lucia had changed the script for the play yesterday. That was what Vernon had been trying to say all along, because Claire had presented them in a good light. And now, Burl was eager to continue the important work started by their commander. Everyone around was delighted that even the deputy approved of this strange idea. The knights were so engrossed that they didn't notice Lucia, who happened to be passing by. But the heroine became interested in what her knights had decided to do this time. Therefore, she carefully followed them, since she still managed to take her daughter to kindergarten. It turned out that the helpers were trying to do good deeds, but in very strange ways. Only Lucia saw that in this way, they were only further ruining the reputation of their squad. But right now, Clure couldn't stop the knights, who had already taken up their next task, so the woman had no choice but to watch them from the side. Burl found a poor woman who had been left alone with her child by one of the aristocrats. The boy missed his father so much that he could barely hold back tears from incredible sadness. But his mother had no evidence other than the physical resemblance of her son to his father. However, the knights still took on this task, which many would have thought hopeless. Vernon was always prepared for such operations, so he called upon his pet eagle. The bird was so well trained that it immediately obeyed its young owner. With a few gestures, the man explained to the eagle exactly what kind of person to look for. Jillian hoped that she would be able to use her fists for their intended purpose. But then she noticed the boy's tearful look, which wanted a completely different outcome. The little boy sadly explained that he wanted to meet his dad at least once in his life. Meanwhile, Emily went on a date with a rich man for the first time in a long time, but she didn't suspect that this ducal Chester was the very father of the child. The woman hoped that with the help of this man, she would finally end her teaching career. That's why she gave him many compliments, which made the aristocrat blossom before our eyes. But in reality, Tanks didn't have a single drop of respect for Chester, because she only wanted money. Suddenly, the teacher heard a surprisingly familiar voice, which, in her opinion, was impossible. However, it was true that Lucia's deputy was nearby, along with some child. Moreover, Knight Kluwer grabbed Chester and began to demand an explanation as to why he did not raise his son. The boy prevented the assistants from carrying out real justice, since he did not wish harm to his father. Although Dukel began to deny his paternity, it was obvious that the child was clearly his. Emily couldn't even imagine that she almost got involved with a man who had already dumped the lady. Since the purpose of the visit was only a meeting, the knights quickly released the indignant man. However, he managed to throw after them that such people were just a bunch of criminals. Even the usually calm Burl couldn't tolerate such an attitude towards noble knights. But Emily didn't want to be drawn into the conflict, so she began to deal with the deceiver herself. But the man didn't feel a drop of guilt about the deception, because he also considered Tanks a liar. The teacher did not tolerate this humiliation for long, so soon Chester fell to the floor in pain. The woman had seen enough of Lucia's wrath, so she was now afraid of few people in life. The knights were delighted at the sight of such a lively teacher, because few defended themselves. But Emily didn't take into account the fact that she was going against an enraged man who could raise his hand. However, at the very last moment, Alterath shielded the woman with his body, taking the blow himself. Dukel hadn't planned on angering one of the knights, so he stepped back in fear. At that moment, the only thing holding Burl back from a real fight was the presence of a small child. The boy really wasn't ready to see his bad father get hurt. That's the only reason Alterath ignored the fact that some impudent guy had just hit him. However, this behavior made an impression on Emily, who was grateful for the rescue. This man, who was comforting someone else's child, seemed to her almost like an angel from heaven. As a result, even the next day, Tanks couldn't get the handsome knight out of her head. Everything about Alteratha's image attracted and pleased Madame, although she did not want to admit it. Lost in her thoughts, the woman paid almost no attention to the children. Moreover, she could not restrain herself and screamed loudly from an excess of emotions throughout the entire class. All this led to a great misunderstanding. Because Caesar took this cry personally, Emily was only saved from further disgrace by a sudden knock on the door, to which she turned her attention. It turned out that the headmistress urgently needed Tagsin in her office as soon as possible. As the woman suspected, Norsha added to her problems in the form of a new student in the class. Emily immediately realized that things weren't so simple with this child, because he transferred in the middle of the year. At that very moment, a boy arrived with his guardian, and his name was Evan Kilgeese. Although the baby looked quite ordinary, his family remained one of the most famous. At this moment, no less interesting events were taking place in the imperial palace. The emperor urgently needed help from his best assistants, so he called them. The men appeared quickly enough to bring a smile to the ruler's face. Phaedorin immediately realized that the whole point was that people began to learn about the tree without damage. But General Helbert was not at all in favor of the idea of them opening the doors to everyone. But the elder Ruvens saw no other option than to resolve all disputes peacefully. Wenham was so determined to defend his position that he didn't even spare the furniture around him. But Phaedorin was a worthy opponent and was not going to give in to his rival so quickly. While the men argued among themselves, the emperor was horrified by their oppressive natures. Literally, one glance from the general was enough for Albert to hide under the table, so he preferred not to interfere in the dispute, although given his status, he could easily shut everyone up. That evening after kindergarten, Nia, as always, joyfully ran to meet her mother. Lucia did everything possible to not be late this time and see a smile on her daughter's face. But not a day passed in the heroine's life without her encountering new adventures. And this time, Roy Whitney added to the woman's fun, being impressed by her skills. It was no secret to the boy that Kluwer was the commander of the Dark Knights. But Lucia had never been asked to show off her skills before. At that very moment, a woman who had managed to lose her son came running for him. She cheerfully introduced herself to Lucia as Susie, as she respected the dark-haired madam. The heroine herself did not notice how this lady cleverly forced herself into her company for some time. Roy's mother was in the mood for a chat and started discussing the latest news about Chester. The aristocrat heard ducal claim that he had been beaten by the Order of the Dark Knights themselves. The heroine was not delighted by such details, which painted her in a bad light. She wouldn't be surprised at all to hear that she was being called to a meeting about this. But suddenly, Susie reported that the aristocrat turned out to be an impudent scoundrel. It was good news for the commander that the people did not give up her knights during identification. This meant that there could very well be a good future for her daughter by her side. In fact, Lucia had long desired such changes, but could not achieve them. And Madame knew all this only because her relative witnessed this situation. When the woman came home with her daughter in the evening, she immediately suspected something was wrong. The door handle was not at all in the position in which Lucia had left it in the morning. So Madame called Nia into her arms and asked her to close her eyes for a while. When the little girl obeyed, Cluer herself prepared to fight the unknown enemy. In just a few seconds, she filled her blade with powerful energy, capable of cutting through everything. It was clear from the heroine's eyes that she had no intention of letting anyone hurt her daughter. Therefore, as soon as the unknown person attacked her, the woman easily repelled his blow. Lucia's gaze showed a murderous desire to quickly deal with the enemy. But when this man took off his cloak, the heroine was very surprised. All because the eternally busy General Wenham himself came to visit her unexpectedly. What came as a surprise to Nia was that this grandfather, for some reason, called himself her godfather. In a couple of minutes, Lucia was able to prepare the hall for this unexpected meeting with the old man. The girl beamed with genuine joy at the sight of another possible relative. But the general did not share her feelings, since he did not communicate with children very much. Soon the lady remembered the rules of decency, so she cheerfully introduced herself to the adult. Nia was glad that she had the opportunity to talk to such an important grandfather. So the little girl innocently told him about all her successes in personal hygiene. Wenham praised the girl hesitantly, as he did not understand what she wanted from him. And then Nia answered this question, clarifying how she should address her new acquaintance. But at that moment, Lucia returned to the room, as she had managed to make tea. The general was delighted by the appearance of a woman, next to whom everything was much simpler. He never thought he would live to see the day when Claire herself would pour him tea. But the taste of this drink turned out to be so terrible that the old man could not take even a sip, while the heroine sincerely tried to make the tea as tasty as possible for her friend. Realizing this, Helbert immediately corrected himself and praised the drink offered to him. The general did not dare refuse the lady, although in fact he had hardly ever eaten sweets in his life. However, he thanked Lucia's daughter for her generosity, which turned out to be a fatal mistake for him. All because the little girl immediately presented the old man with all sorts of goodies from home. The lady did all this in order to get permission from the adult to call him grandfather. Neither Lucia nor Helbert expected that this moment would be so important for the girl. Claire rightly judged that such a nickname for the general was not far from the truth. So from that day on, Nia had a real grandfather, who quickly fell in love with her. The girl was the one who benefited the most from this, as she only became more cheerful. Lucia was only happy because the smile never left her daughter's face that evening. But not everything was so serene in the general's life, because at the meeting in the morning, they began to attack him. The old man courageously answered any questions regarding the general gathering of the various empires nearby. Only Claire was not present at this meeting, as she was taking her daughter to kindergarten. So Wenham had no intention of prolonging the already tedious discussion. Therefore, the representative of the Yellow Knights was left without many answers to his questions. However, this was not the end of things for Helbert, as Leon had business with him. In his excitement, Rubens did not immediately catch up with such a respected man who was always busy. The whole point was that the magician considered it wrong to discuss such things without Lucia. Leon came to the meeting specifically to support the woman. Wenham took advantage of the situation and asked the man to personally convey the information to Cluer. He knew perfectly well that Rubens would never be able to refuse, because this was an opportunity for conversation. And indeed, as soon as the magician received the documents, he was blown away as if by the wind. The behavior of the commander of the White Knights reminded the old man of his youth and energy. Meanwhile, The heroine was horrified by how much paperwork she had accumulated. But Lucia couldn't get the thought out of her head about what to do with the tree without damaging it. Too many options completely confused the reserved commander, so she needed at least a little time alone. But she heard footsteps. Claire assumed that one of her assistants had arrived, even though she had clearly told them not to come in. But it turned out that Leon, visiting an acquaintance, had awkwardly sat down in the guest chair. The woman had no idea why Ruvens had suddenly visited her, but Lucia took advantage of the situation to thank the man for his recent help. She pointed out to Leon the petals he had summoned with his magic, and the mage felt pleased by this. But Claire couldn't get the words out that this was her attempt at gratitude. Ruvens waited impatiently to hear what this beautiful woman was going to tell him. But the heroine suddenly changed the conversation to why the man was next to her at all. Having learned that all this was for the sake of papers, Madame said that there was no need to worry so much. In fact, Leon wanted to use this excuse to confess his feelings, and a man could never have found a better time in his life than now. Therefore, he began by saying that he wanted to continue to help the commander of the Dark Knights in everything. Lucia seemed like the kind of person who could listen to and understand almost anything, but at the most inopportune time, a princess from another empire burst into Clure's office. It was Lilith Farandel, who had been hanging around the handsome Leon since childhood. The man was not at all as happy about the meeting as the girl who suddenly appeared. The princess adored Rufus more than anyone else in the world, but she never admitted this fact to anyone. The magician was used to treating women delicately, regardless of their behavior towards him, so he was able to calmly find out that he was assigned to Lilith as an escort. Lucia's assistants secretly observed their conversation and were disappointed by this turn of events. Meanwhile, at kindergarten, Emily struggled to come up with another activity for the children, but Siren was gloomier than a cloud, despite the fact that she usually took an interest in games. Yvonne immediately guessed that the princess was offended because she was given someone else's role in the last game. And later, in a theatrical performance, this same character looked like a real monster. This is precisely why the Emperor's daughter's pride was so deeply hurt. During the conversation, Siren suddenly admitted that she was very angry with the adults. But it was a new boy who found out about this, who didn't even have time to officially introduce himself to anyone. He was forbidden to appear in public so early, but the little boy got his grandfather's permission. In response, Siren looked disdainfully at Yvonne and said that the child had not had an easy time. The daughter of the Bairn family was having a hard time coping with a quarrel with a friend, which she had indirectly initiated. But the red-haired girl was not going to make peace first, as she was afraid of facing alienation. She felt guilty that the princess was subsequently punished. Finally, the time came for the important announcement that Emily had prepared for all the children. It turned out that under the huge blanket there were cute rabbits, which attracted everyone. Siren also happily ran towards the bunnies to pet them personally. But on the way, she accidentally ran into Yvonne, which again made her remember the quarrel. The red-haired girl was so confused that she didn't even have time to ask for forgiveness. But Eldarion didn't even listen to anything and arrogantly walked past her former friend. This made Byrne even more embarrassed that she couldn't express her emotions. Meanwhile, Tangst announced that all the kids would be taking care of the bunnies for the rest of the episode. Roy immediately stated that he himself did not like to eat carrots, which he would have to try together with the animal. Evan came to his aid, advising the boy not to listen to the smell of food. He said that his sister hates vegetables, and this is the only way she can eat them. Emily happily announced that everyone could follow Kilgus's advice for the first time. A little later, the rabbits were carefully placed in special cages for their maintenance. The newcomer was tasked with being the first to ensure that all the animals had time to eat, but instead, he muttered under his breath that these little ones would be better off dead soon. The boy didn't expect the timid Nia to be close enough to hear his words. The girl whispered in panic that she had only brought the remains of carrots for the animals. In response, Evan simply smiled at the little girl and walked past, as if she was unworthy of conversation. Nia couldn't see the boy's expression, but she guessed it wasn't good. This whole situation scared the saint to death, but she would hardly dare tell anyone. That same evening, the assistants called Lucia to them to complain about Leon. All this time, he devoted his attention to the foreign princess, who was crazy about him. The heroine didn't quite understand why this situation should irritate her. Even when the woman tried hard, she felt nothing but indifference within herself. so she calmly turned around and walked away, leaving Ruvens to sort things out on his own. The knights looked at the unconscious commander with bewildered eyes, as they could do nothing to help. In fact, they were worried about the fact that they had managed to place their bets on Leon in their relationship. So Vernon decided for the first time to help the stupid Ruvens win Lucia's heart. Meanwhile, the magician tried his best to be cold with the clingy and cheerful princess. But, as before, he had no other choice, and Leon was forced to continue accompanying Lilith. Salvation for the man came unexpectedly in the form of Kluwer's assistants, who wanted to free him. Farandel did not immediately understand that these people from the squad of Dark Knights were planning something bad towards her. Therefore, the girl didn't even have time to squeak before she was already being dragged away by the arms for a conversation. Leon watched what was happening with surprise, since this was only a joy to him. But Ruvens was even more delighted when Vernon offered him to go on the mission with Lucia instead of him. The knight had prepared all the information about the task in advance so that the magician could complete it brilliantly. Confused and unable to understand anything, Leon couldn't even properly thank the guy. That evening, Claire, as per the assignment, went to the market, where she was supposed to meet with the assistant. The woman arrived too early, so she knew she would have to wait for some time. To better blend in with the crowd, the lady pretended to be interested in the goods from the nearest counter. But this was a mistake, because the pretty old woman immediately began to offer the heroine many things. Suddenly, Madame heard a familiar voice from the side, which did not belong to any of her assistants. She looked at Leon in surprise, as for some reason, he looked completely different from his usual self. Lucia expected to see anyone but Ruvens willing to help her with this mission. But not everything was so simple, because the heroine also had to change clothes in order to blend in with the crowd. The woman had done something similar many times, so she was used to it and felt comfortable. But Ruvens constantly blushed from the realization that they looked like a couple when they walked next to each other. But Lucia quickly shattered all of the man's dreams when she asked him to pretend to be her brother. Leon noticed that the Dark Knight commander looked angry, so he didn't argue with her. He was tired from entertaining the princess, so this walk was like a breath of fresh air for him. The man confessed to the commander how difficult it was for him to communicate with Farandel. Lucia understood his feelings perfectly, since she had not been able to cope with the crown prince before. That's why the woman suggested that sometimes she take Leon for walks like this to make him feel better. Ruvens never thought that the cold Kluwer would make the first move in bringing them closer. The magician was over the moon that the woman was not against his company, so he admitted that he sometimes tries to choose a gift for Nia, but he doesn't know what she likes. The heroine herself thought about this question, which was not so easy to answer. She took good care of the baby, so the girl had plenty of food and clothes. Lutia even devoted a fair amount of time to her, enjoying the lady's smile. Only now did Claire remember how Nia had whispered that she loved her the most. Ruvens waited impatiently for the answer to his question, as he wanted to charm the sweet girl. But he didn't expect the commander to use himself as an example. The man did not answer, although he himself thought that he also loved this woman. Undercover, they continued to stroll between the city's stalls, looking around carefully. Ruvens suddenly noticed a brooch in the shape of a cat, which reminded him of the beautiful Lucia. In response, Kluwer found a white kitten and compared it to the mage, since the resemblance was obvious. Leon was embarrassed by how much their conversation resembled a regular date with each other. But they didn't have time to buy the goods, as one of the bandits kicked the shop. He shouted loudly to the whole area that the saleswoman had not paid him for his trade. The heroine was at a loss at the sight of such complexity, because they were not allowed to give themselves away. But Leon immediately became angry, because this man had ruined his meeting with the commander. So, with the help of magic, the man easily threw the bandit away from the counters. People around began to joyfully whisper that such a powerful magician had come to their aid. Claire had no idea that Ruvens liked the brooch so much that he would defend it. In the evening, when the task was completed, the man apologized for the noise he had made. He knew he had put their secret mission at risk, but Lucia wasn't angry at all. Leon was surprised when the woman herself gave him the brooches he had recently seen. Moreover, the madam pinned a dark version to her clothes as a token of gratitude for the help. The heroine had no idea how important her actions were for the light wizard. But Leon stood there for some time, all red, in the middle of the shopping street. The next morning, right under the windows of the palace, training of knights from other detachments took place. Having nothing better to do, Irene watched them, but did not see Lucia's silhouette anywhere. The man understood that even with such efforts, none of them would be able to surpass Kluer. But he was much more interested in why the foreign princess had come to the empire. Lilith insisted that she simply wanted to befriend Leon and asked for his blessing to do so. But the prince didn't believe a word of the cunning girl, who had already come several times. He immediately warned her that he would not allow Commander Lucia to be hurt in this way. As a result, Farandel was left confused in the middle of the empty corridor, hating Kluer more and more. At that moment in kindergarten, Norsha could not make a very important decision for herself. She sincerely did not understand why Count Kilgus had given her such favorable conditions. The man demanded that she give his teacher a place for the princess's class, but this man was too dangerous for the headmistress to do such a thing, so the old woman consulted with the only person who understood politics. The heroine also reacted skeptically to the count's proposal, despite its obvious benefits. Kilgus often made long-term plans, so few people dared to mess with him. Despite her past life experience, even Lucia couldn't guess what he needed. As expected, Norsha ultimately chose the best option, granting a seat on the council. Claire herself couldn't have come up with a better replacement, but she still decided to remain on guard. Before leaving, the old woman unexpectedly drew the woman's attention to her handsome son. She admitted that even as a child, he was a caring boy, although he suffered from an allergy to cats. So Ruvens hoped that Lucia would not miss her chance, although Madame did not understand anything. Meanwhile, Leon again had to accompany a foreign princess he didn't like. Lilith keenly felt the man's alienation, although she could not find any reason for it. The girl's only guess was that Ruvens was the father of Lucia's child. At that moment, out of excitement, the man accidentally dropped his cup of tea, which shattered into pieces. Both acquaintances jumped up in fright, since this had never happened to any of them before. But Leon proudly refused to accept help from the princess, although she wished the best for him. Instead, the man wiped away the remains of the tea and shards with his handkerchief. For Farandel, the realization that this man was avoiding her so much was terrible and painful. She hastened to leave the unpleasant magician for today, but a cunning plan was born in her head. The girl decided to obtain Lucia's blood to test Leon's true paternity. Meanwhile, Claire was carrying out the last of the patrol tasks that fell to her lot. The woman tried to blend in with the crowd and distract herself from thoughts about the strange Count Kilgus. The only thing that helped her with this was the appearance of Ruvens, who was a little late due to his own affairs. Together, they began to go around to the citizens of the Empire, who praised the activities of the Dark Knights. The heroine had no idea that her assistants had carried out the advertising campaign so well. As usual, many people were delighted with Leon's appearance, turning all their attention to him. Lucia was not very happy that the man was attracting a lot of people here too. She would prefer to remain in the shadows for the sake of a safe and speedy completion of the tour. The last call was unresolved and involved a woman complaining of harassment from a man. The knights listened calmly as she told them about this man's advances. And in these descriptions, Leon unexpectedly recognized himself, because this is exactly how he treated Lucia. So he felt uneasy at the thought that the commander could feel hatred towards him. While the commoner was speaking, that same unwanted suitor came to her, and the commanders quickly dealt with the violator of personal boundaries due to intense love. Because of this, before parting, Ruvens asked if Madame was afraid of him. Such an unusual question surprised the heroine, and she didn't even have time to calm the man down. So Lucia had to watch as Leon quickly ran away from her. The next morning, the Emperor announced a friendly tournament with the neighboring empire. Farandel fielded their best fighter to avoid disgracing the entire country with poor skills. But this was not what attracted the heroine's attention, because she had seen her rival's sword before. Ivlis possessed a legendary elven blade that increased the strength and speed of its wielder. The green-haired woman herself hoped that her rival would not figure out her cunning trick. In just a few seconds, the fight was about to begin, so both knights got ready. As soon as the race started, Lucia rushed to intercept her rival in order to gain an advantage. The heroine tried to restrain some of her skills, otherwise she would have destroyed Ivlis long ago, and the poor woman tried to find at least one weak spot in Kluer's defense, for the sake of a drop of her blood. But no matter what the Farandel representative did, it was all useless against Lucia. So Ivlis quickly realized that without a powerful blow, she wouldn't succeed. Clure studied her opponent and realized that she couldn't use a sword properly. Therefore, with one blow, Madame ended the fight, which she did not want to participate in the first place. But Ivlis couldn't just accept a defeat in which she didn't receive blood. However, her vile attack only angered the heroine even more, and she summoned her aura. The woman's face clearly showed how disappointed she was in the knight's actions, so Ivlis fell to her knees in defeat, because she could do nothing more. Claire was easily and simply recognized as the winner, and she truly deserved the title. But for some reason, Madame had difficulty removing the glove, although this had never happened before. So she accidentally cut herself on the pin that they used to fasten her suit for some reason. Lucia didn't need the thing, so she thoughtlessly threw the pin into the ring. But all this was a cunning plan of the princess, who noticed this action perfectly well. So when the tournament was over, Lilith found this blood pin on the court. All this in order to make a secret potion that would allow one to identify the child's parents. Naturally, the princess told everything to her best ward in the hope of receiving support. But Ivlis did not approve of Farendel's insidious plans, which could destroy more than one life. None of the children in the kindergarten suspected that anyone could freely approach them. From the very morning, Nia persuaded Yvonne to play with the princess after forgiveness. But the red-haired girl didn't believe that Siren would really become friends with her again so easily. However, the kids supported their friend, since they themselves wanted to play together. Only after this did Yvonne hesitantly walk towards the princess, although she was still worried. As soon as Byrne left, a previously unknown green-haired woman approached Nia and Roy. She asked to be shown where the women's restroom was and offered some candy in exchange. Meanwhile, Siren was in the classroom with a gloomy face, although she wanted to play with everyone else. But while she was at odds with Yvonne, the girl could not allow herself to smile openly. However, for some reason, the red-haired lady could not find the right words for a simple apology. But the princess was indeed severely scolded for playing a role in the play that was not hers. That's why Miss was so looking forward to an apology, but it was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of Whitney. The kids were horrified when they heard that the candy was given out by the madame who took Nia. The boy, with tears in his eyes, admitted that he couldn't go to the girls' restroom, but it didn't matter. The rescue team, consisting of Yvonne and Siren, has already begun its action for the sake of their timid friend. Only Evan tried to reason with the worried ladies about what they needed to tell the teacher, but the princess was afraid that during this time, their friend could be taken very far away and for a long time. As soon as she yelled at the Count's son, he stood aside, worried, not knowing what to do. Meanwhile, Nia tried with all her might to get rid of the clingy and unpleasant aunt, but she didn't want to let the little girl go, because she needed to give her the candy. But at that very moment, Yvonne jumped out and with a skillful blow pushed the woman aside. Following this, the guards who were guarding Siren grabbed the stranger by both arms. The emperor's daughter was outraged that this woman also called herself a princess, but for Nia, it was much more important that her friends were once again acting almost together. The girl admitted that out of caution, she did not take anything from that strange lady, after which she asked whether the girls had managed to make peace with each other during this time. Siren looked at Yvonne with excitement, waiting for her to say the right words. But out of excitement, Byrne lied that she didn't remember what she initially wanted to talk about with her friend. Because of this, the little girls started arguing with each other again, which already meant their peace. So Nia was only glad to see how both ladies were happily communicating with each other. A few hours later, Lilith was finally released from custody, and she immediately ran into the prince. Irene was furious that traces of the secret potion being brewed were found in the guest's room. No one in their country was allowed to conduct tests to determine kinship between people. Therefore, Eldarion boldly threatened the princess that it would be better for her to leave here in a good way. Ferendel herself understood perfectly well that her father would never choose his daughter over the country. So this time, the girl lost on all fronts and could do nothing about it. And the heroine had her own fun the next morning, because she arrived at the Reuven's estate. Although the assistants greeted Madame joyfully, this made her feel even more awkward. The woman still couldn't get Leon's question about whether she scared him out of her head, so Lucia assumed that Reuven's sick leave might have been just a cover. Moreover, the commander was embarrassed by the fact that all his subordinates were stealthily glancing at her. The woman quickly reached Leon's door with their help, but he did not want to open it. The man really wasn't feeling well, so he was afraid of infecting someone. But the heroine didn't care about other people's germs, so she confidently opened the doors. But the woman did not expect to see that her friend was not in the best condition. All Leon could do now was hide under the blanket, just so as not to show his face. He blushed not only from illness, but also from embarrassment. But he could attribute it all to his health. The closer Kluwer was to him, the more the magician's temperature unconsciously rose. But the woman did not notice this nuance, so she sat almost close to the suffering patient. Leon was pleased with all this unsolicited care, but he was afraid of infecting the commander. But for Lucia, Reuven's behavior reminded her of her first and awkward meeting with Nia. The man tried to keep his distance from his friend so that she wouldn't get worse later. It took Claire a moment to realize that even now, Leon was much more worried about her. As soon as the heroine supported Reuven's a little, he threw himself into her arms out of gratitude. But the man went a little overboard with his force, so they both fell onto the soft bed. Feeling a pleasant warmth spreading throughout his body, the magician promised to follow his heart. Lucia tried not to disturb him until she realized that Leon had indeed fallen asleep. In a few days, a musical matinee was supposed to take place in the kindergarten. Yvonne was absolutely certain that she would take the royal item in the form of a violin for herself. But the real princess did not believe that this element truly corresponded to her status. That's why Siren personally chose a harp that could win the hearts of many people. And only Nia had no idea what instrument she would choose for this important day. Since Lucia was busy this time, she appointed Reuven's in charge of her daughter. And so the man and the little girl found themselves in front of a store selling various musical instruments. But the girl did not dare to move first, because she felt awkward. Leon tried to melt her heart with a gentle smile and drive away all her fears. As soon as they entered, it turned out that Reuven's was well acquainted with the owner of the store. Therefore, the magician could only introduce the daughter to his friend, who charmed everyone. The seller quickly got down to business, as he himself loved to demonstrate his tools. And he began with a huge and majestic piano, which stood in the middle of a large room. As soon as his fingers touched the keys, it was as if incredible magic began to happen. Nisia was deeply impressed, and this was only the beginning of her adventure. Next, for another example, Reuven's picked up a small violin to show it to the lady. The man hadn't practiced playing it for a long time, but he was still able to remember the melody. And this song reminded the little girl of the day when her mother saved her from the terrible people in the basement. So the choice for the lady from that moment on was obvious, because she was madly in love with Lucia. Before leaving, Reuven's once again thanked his friend for his help in choosing a violin. But then they noticed the guardian approaching with little Evan Kilgeese. This woman brought her child so that she could also find a suitable instrument for him. Leon didn't want to distract his friend from his work, because he still had to return Nia home. Meanwhile, the boy calmly greeted the lady, whom he would see more than once in the kindergarten. But the little girl still didn't feel very comfortable in his presence because of fear. Every time, Kilgeese, with his very appearance, brought incredible horror to her after one incident. Even though Evan hadn't planned to touch Nia, she still couldn't calm down. The memory of him wishing death on all rabbits was still fresh in the lady's mind. But the little girl didn't dare tell anyone about this incident, so she was afraid to go alone. Since Kluwer asked the magician to take care of her daughter, he told her everything. During the dialogue, the man noticed a black brooch carefully pinned to Nia's clothing. The girl happily admitted that her mother had indeed given her such a gift not long ago. Then the man decided to show off his brooch, which he also received from Kluwer. It turned out to be an exact copy of the lady's decoration, except that it was white. But the miss reacted to the brooch in a completely different way than the man had initially expected. The baby screamed loudly that Lucia belonged only to her, because she was her mother, after which she ran away from her rival, the magician she had previously liked. Meanwhile, the heroine received another assignment, which she was not at all happy about. She would have preferred to stay close to her daughter, but this matter also required no delay. Phyderin was worried that rumors were gradually spreading about the sacred tree on the lake. Moreover, the first mention of this place referred specifically to the temple, which everyone believed in. But from her previous mission, Lucia had learned that it was better not to trust priests in this matter. Kluwer's mission was to find the Duke's child in a closed kingdom. No one could officially interfere there, since that country had forbidden access to the temple. The commander herself was interested in stopping the temple's incomprehensible actions. She was ready to do everything to ensure that little Nia would not be in any danger in the future. However, it turned out that this time too, they were not going to let the best swordmaster go without a partner. So a pleased prince came out to meet the woman, who could help her in her business. Lutia couldn't deny that Irene had been useful in the negotiations, but she would have preferred to go without him. But what worried Madame most was that she had gone to the meeting instead of meeting with Nia. This was because this meeting was called by the Kilgus family, and no one could refuse it. Claire tried not to talk to anyone in particular in order to find an opportunity to escape early. But, as luck would have it, the madam introduced herself as Evan's guardian, Annabelle Queller. This lady specifically emphasized the fact that Lucia was never able to give her last name. It was all because she was sure that the commander of the Dark Knights was in front of her. After all, surnames were usually hidden when their family tree was incredibly famous and rich. So the heroine found herself in a very bad situation for herself because of just one question. Aristocrats who completely trusted and sympathized with the woman stood up for her. But Annabelle insisted that she wanted to see confirmed identities next to Evan. The fact that her child was accepted into kindergarten was already sufficient proof. Lutia was saved only by the sudden appearance of the Empress, who took an interest in the quarrel. In fact, no one sent Rubina an invitation, but she still came as Siren's mother. So the atmosphere after the appearance of the Emperor's wife changed dramatically in a couple of moments. So Queller had to leave Lucia alone for a while, because she didn't give her last name. The commander had no idea how to save himself in this situation. A little later, problems also arose for Ruvens, who tried to give violin lessons to children. But Yvonne couldn't sit still while Nia didn't look in the man's direction. The only thing that made him happy was the company of Lucia, who carefully brought tea and food to everyone. Sitting next to Claire, he imagined what their family life might be like. But as soon as Leon approached Madame for a moment, the lady immediately interfered. She deliberately kept sitting between the adults, not wanting to give in to this battle. With her whole appearance, Nia told Ruvens that her mother belonged only to her. But the heroine herself did not notice her daughter's mood, continuing to treat her with various tasty treats. As soon as the girl heard that Leon had bought all of this, she was dumbfounded with hostility towards him. The lady had no intention of accepting anything the magician brought into their small house. The heroine attributed her daughter's behavior to the fact that she was upset about his business trip. She had no idea that it was all about Ruvens, who was sitting a few meters away from her. The man tried to pretend that he was happy with his tea drinking, even though the tea looked terrible. But for the sake of the woman he loved, he was ready to drink anything, and this drink was no exception. Since Leon asked for more tea, it was the little girl who responded first. But Lucia was afraid that her daughter might burn herself, so she did not give her a teapot for tea. Because of this, Nia decided that her mother loved Ruvens more than her, because she cared about him. So she ran off to her room in frustration, screaming that she hated Kluwer. It was a great shock for the heroine that the little girl suddenly said such words to her, but she never had a chance to talk to her daughter, as she was forced to leave for a mission to Arcus. The aristocrats of the state immediately learned that the crown prince of the empire himself had come to visit them. They were unhappy that the emperor had decided to interfere in their affairs so unexpectedly. What the men feared most was that Albert's detachment would actually find the true heir. Meanwhile, at Lucia's estate, all the hired maids were frightened by the lady's behavior. The little girl came back from kindergarten in a terrible mood, and no one could help her with it. The general remained to keep an eye on the lady, but even he was confused by Nia's condition. It turned out that the girl was sad, because she had not had time to make peace with her mother. Helbert consoled the girl by saying that Lucia would soon return home, but for now the lady needed to eat well. But Claire did not leave her daughter without a surprise, which the general happily announced. The little girl instantly forgot about all her sorrows when she saw the guest entering the room. It turned out to be the lady's beloved adopted sister, who was also glad to talk again. Soon the girls sat together in front of the fireplace and began to remember their past at the orphanage. Mia still thought sadly about how cold she had been in that place during the winter. Because of this, Nia again gave in to the sadness about the fight with her mother before she left on a mission. But the girl was here precisely to dispel all the little girl's worries about this. She reminded the lady that she now had a real family, so she should be happy. Only after this did Nia admit that she had cried while drawing a picture for her mother in kindergarten. She was still planning to give it to the woman in the hope that she would no longer be offended. But it came as a surprise to Miss that Mia considered one drawing insufficient for forgiveness. In the end, the girl decided to write a few words as a declaration of love to her mother. She said that she tries to be like her most ordinary friends in kindergarten. And at that very moment, one of the lady's friends, Yvonne, appeared on the threshold. It was all because the general was trying his best to lift Nia's spirits, so he called Bern. The girls could come up with a lot of funny things in each other's company, so they started having fun. At the same time, the heroine was riding in a carriage with the prince, whose company she was not very happy with. The man had already planned the best date with the woman, even though they were on a mission. But he didn't expect Lucia to suggest splitting up to finish the mission faster. Irene had expected that they would spend almost all their time in another country almost alone. But the commander ran away so quickly that the prince had no other choice. The first thing that alarmed Madame was that all the fields were empty, as if they had not been used. This led Claire to believe that the former duke was hiding the child out of fear for his life. There were rumors that the butler Barton managed to save the heiress from the burning house. But on the way, the girl was cruelly taken away from the old man, and he could do nothing about it. The heroine decided to start her search from the orphanage where her daughter once lived. This made Lucia feel even more anxious, although she didn't understand why she was so worried. The manager joyfully greeted the guest who came to pick up her child. Claire tried hard to pretend that she had a lot of money in order to win the woman over. Therefore, the owner of the shelter quickly got down to business, offering to examine the children in need. The heroine was alarmed by the fact that for some reason the children were nowhere to be seen, although this was their home. She indicated to the owner that she needed a little girl with purple hair. In response, Madame smiled slyly, since Lucia was far from the first to make such a request. The cunning woman hinted that such children cost more because they were in high demand. At first, this did not bother the heroine, since she thought that her task would not be too difficult. While expecting children, Lucia remembered that her friend Nia also had purple hair. But at this point, there was no evidence that she was the Duke's daughter. At that moment, the hostess brought in a whole bunch of children who had purple hair. Claire never imagined that so many babies could fit her description. The children did not say a word to the guest, as they were all visibly depressed about something. All this made Claire's mission much more difficult, as she had hoped to find the child more quickly. And now, Madame will have to personally check all records of admission of children with this hair color. But then one of the little girls suddenly started coughing up some strange red liquid. At first glance, the heroine determined that it was hair dye that had accidentally gotten inside the lady. This circumstance angered the heroine so much that she did not stand on ceremony with the hostess. What irritated Lucia most was the difficulty in finding official records of the children. She was able to extract a little information from the owner, but even that was not enough. Therefore, Madame found herself in front of a locked door, which did not bother her at all due to her skills. So the woman kicked down the flimsy door with one kick, revealing people inside. Lucia didn't intend to deal with them right away, as she still needed some information. It was not at all surprising that the locals turned against the lady who burst in on them. For now, Claire pretended that she couldn't resist the angry men and women. She tried to figure out which of them was the main one, so that she could attack him first. The men behaved much more boldly than the women, as they took advantage of the guest's tied position. The shelter owner concluded that this madam was not a dark monster, which made her happy. Here, Lucia heard these people remembering the little saint they had sold to the temple. The heroine was unpleasant to hear how these commoners brazenly discussed her daughter. So inside the madam, everything was on fire with the desire to punish the people who sold children. She used her magic, and the ground beneath the residents' feet began to crack. No one could stop Lucia's rage at the moment, as she truly hated these people. People had no idea that this woman was looking for the girl with purple hair because of her status. They began to hide behind their children, begging for mercy and forgiveness for their actions. The boy who was nominated to Claire himself did not understand why he was treated so cruelly. But even this did not make Lucia calm down and peacefully resolve the situation with the greedy commoners. At this time, at the general's estate, Nia continued to cause problems for everyone around her with her behavior. Leon no longer knew what to do with the little girl, who categorically did not want to spend time with him. Ruvens realized that he first needed to make peace with the lady in order to teach her to play. But the girl stubbornly hid from the adult, with whom she did not want to share her mother. She was shaking with worry that she would have no time left for Lucia. Nia hadn't seen much of Cluer lately anyway, so this was critical for her. Then Ruvens approached the little girl and asked her to listen to his words at least for a little while. The man promised that he would find the girl another teacher, even if she hated him after that. The lady was surprised that the magician actually envied her for such a life. Ruvens admitted that he too would like to have a good and strong family like Nia's. This melted the girl's heart a little, although she still did not want to give up her mother. But instead of running away, this time the lady decided to keep an eye on this man next to Lucia. Leon was quite happy with this option, since he would still be able to communicate with Cluer. Here he noticed a beautiful drawing of the girl, which she planned to give to her mother. With a smile, Ruvens suggested doing this as soon as possible, since they could come to Lucia. Despite the task, the heroine had to go to a banquet in Arctis, which she was not happy about. The woman was worried that commoners might have managed to sell more children. But Irene demanded Lucia's attention in every possible way, so she could not avoid his company. The man was delighted at the sight of the woman's dress, which he personally chose for her. The prince insisted that Cluer needed to be well rested before continuing the mission, but the heroine sincerely did not understand why she had to waste time next to the heir. Then the commander heard her daughter's voice, which was impossible, because she was on a mission. However, the familiar voice repeated itself again, causing Madame to look around in confusion. It turned out that Leon came to this place with Nia and Mia to meet Lucia. As expected, Irene was displeased with Ruvens' interference in his planned date. As usual, Claire did not interfere in the men's disputes, which seemed useless to her. But this time, Leon defended his place more strongly next to Lucia, who was dazzlingly dressed. The woman felt pleased by such an awkward compliment, although she had not expected it. However, the question remained for her as to why the two girls had come to such a distant place. Only after this did Nia dare to give her mother the drawing she had worked so hard on. Madame had never received gifts from her daughter before, so she was noticeably surprised by this. But the two arguing men were even more surprised when they heard their beloved's laughter. Seeing such a sweet creation, the heroine could not contain her warm emotions. Nia waited in confusion for Lucia's answer to her question about whether she would continue to be her mother. And the woman, with a gentle hug, convinced the girl that she had nothing to worry about. This is how just one careful drawing instantly reconciled mother and daughter.